Hey guys, today we're marching alongside tired soldiers whose boots are caked with mud, whose armour rattles with every step, and whose eyelids keep dipping like shutters in a breeze. You can almost hear the creak of leather straps and the faint groan of men who have already walked farther than you would on a Black Friday shopping spree, and that's before you even lay down to sleep. Yes, we're talking about how soldiers through history, Romans, medieval knights, frontier, militias, Napoleonic conscripts managed to catch a little rest in the middle of wars and battles. Spoiler, they didn't exactly have memory foam mattresses waiting. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake by the end, let me know your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where people are listening in from. Now picture yourself trudging across a rough dirt track, the wind carrying a smell of campfire smoke and horse sweat. Each step feels heavier than the last, and the only thing you're dreaming of is a soft bed. Except there won't be one. For most soldiers in history, sleep was something stolen, not granted. Armies marched at sunrise, drilled during the day, built camp at dusk, and then hoped the night would be quiet enough to allow a few hours of oblivion. You would stumble into camp, drop your pack, and fall onto whatever patch of ground wasn't crawling with rocks. The rhythm of war rarely paused for anyone's beauty rest. Mainstream fact: Roman legions. They were masters of routine building fortified camps every night on campaign. After marching up to 20 miles, each soldier had to dig ditches, erect palisades, and pitch a leather tent. Only then could they lie down often, 6 or 8 men crammed into one cramped canvas shelter. Sleep didn't come quickly when your tent mate's sandals smelled worse than your uncle's gym socks. But Roman generals believed order and routine mattered more than comfort. Fatigue was secondary to discipline. Quirky tidbit: medieval soldiers sometimes carried their own straw matting, not for comfort, but to keep fleas and lice from overwhelming them in the dirt. It wasn't luxury, it was pest control. Imagine carefully rolling out your bed of straw, like it's some kind of medieval yoga mat, only for the wind to blow half of it away. And then you lie there itchy, trying to pretend you're floating on clouds, while a fellow soldier snores like a dying bagpipe. And yes, historians still argue about whether armies allowed their men regular structured rest, or whether it was chaos snatches of sleep between alarms and guard duty. Some say commanders understood the importance of keeping troops well rested. Others point to countless records of exhausted armies collapsing mid-battle. The truth likely depended on the leader, the army's size, and how close the enemy camped. So when you picture yourself closing your eyes by a campfire, don't get too comfortable. You might be shaken awake for sentry duty any minute. As you ease into this scene, let the soundscape wrap around you, the clink of chainmail, the rustle of cloaks in the cold night air, the distant barking of a dog in some village miles away. Even the wind feels like it's whispering, don't sleep too deeply. And you, exhausted but wary, let your mind drift. Soldiers slept wherever they could, leaning against walls, sprawled beside their shields, curled up under wagons. The ground was their mattress, the sky, their blanket. But just as your breathing slows and the campfire embers glow softer, there's a noise, an order shouted in the dark boots crunching gravel, the shuffle of men moving again. Was it a drill or something worse? You don't know yet. All you know is that sleep once again is slipping away from you. Because the next place soldiers tried to rest was even more uncomfortable. You wriggle under a sagging ridgepole while the first fat raindrops find the exact seam above your nose, like the sky has excellent aim and a sense of humour. The canvas breathes, if breathes means it exhales, a cold, damp sigh straight onto your face, flapping with each gust as though the whole tent is trying to shrug you out like a horse shaking flies. You lay your cloak over the bedroll, your bedroll over the ground sheet, and your hope over everything else, and still the water wins. Welcome to the universal soldier's lullaby, patter patter drip drip, and a chorus of muffled grumbles from the neighbours who are all learning yet again that water resistant is not the same as waterproof, and certainly not the same as sleep friendly. Mainstream historical fact: armies loved tents, but tents rarely loved armies back. Roman legionaries lugged leather shelters called papiliones, goatskin panels stitched tight heavy when dry and twice as heavy when wet. Centuries later, medieval levies raised peaked canvas pavilions for officers and smaller shared tents for the rank and file, often sleeping 6 or more to a cramped A-frame. By the Napoleonic era, and into the American Civil War, common soldiers carried shelter halves, 2 triangles buttoned together with a couple of poles, just enough room for 2 bodies and a puddle to split evenly. On paper, the system sounds efficient. In practice, it meant every rainstorm turned into a negotiation with gravity. Water collects along a seam, your seam collects along your spine, and suddenly you're studying medieval hydrology up close and personal. Quirky tidbit throughout history, soldiers invent bizarre hacks to outsmart weather. You grease a seam with beef tallow because someone swears it encourages water to respect boundaries. You sprinkle ashes on the ground to thicken the mud spoiler, it thickens the smell. In 18th century camps, some men stitched a secret inner drip line from twine so water would follow the string to one safe corner like a trained dog. In trench systems of later wars, soldiers cut a little moat around tent edges, the world's smallest castle defence, hoping the rainwater will obediently flow past instead of through. And somewhere a tired corporal insists that chewing coffee grounds in the dark makes you immune to cold. That part, to be clear, is a belief system, not a science. Historians still argue about just how much tent tech mattered versus morale and logistics. Some point to the Roman obsession with standardized camp layouts, drains and earthworks as proof that good shelter was a tactical advantage. Others counter that even the best tents turn into damp misery when an army moves fast, supplies run thin, or the weather decides to change the lesson plan. There's also debate about who actually got good tents. Officers and nobles usually claim the sturdy canvas pavilions you see in paintings, flags snapping guy lines, tidy rugs inside like a travelling parlour, while common soldiers made do with stitched triangles, cloaks pulled over heads, or just the leeward side of a wagon. One diary's well-appointed night under canvas is another diary's the rain slept in my mouth. Listen closer, rain on canvas has rhythms. First the light tapping that sounds almost friendly like fingers drumming a tabletop, then the heavier drumming, the drops gaining confidence, the seam darkening along its threadline. You feel the cool damp push through your wool like a polite guest who won't take no for an answer. Your neighbour shifts elbow nudging your ribs. Someone curses softly. The historical record kindly redacts the exact word, and a tin cup rattles as the tent leg inches into the mud. The odour of wet wool rises sheepy, sour honest. You tell yourself it's a rustic spa experience, which is the kind of joke you make when the actual spa is 5 centuries and a paycheck away. You try clever geometry. If you lie diagonally, maybe the drip lands on your boot instead of your forehead. If you hunch the cloak just so, maybe it channels water into the hollow of your collarbone rather than into your ear canal. If you place your pack beneath the ridge and your hat as a gutter, maybe you've invented a new civil engineering award. Every army has that one genius who repositions the pole by an inch and declares victory over the storm. 5 minutes later, the storm repositions victory. Here's another solid historical note to roll under your damp pillow seam. Sealer beeswax oil's pitch has been a soldier's friend since the first hide was stretched into a wall. Roman sources mention oiling leather. Medieval quartermasters catalogue waxed threads. Early modern manuals recommend oilcloth and mixtures of linseed and lampblack. The tragedy is that every fix adds weight smell or flammability. Your tent becomes a travelling candle, with structural aspirations something you do not want near a lively campfire. Which brings a very practical routine pitch lower in the wind angle, the door away from the prevailing gust, dig that narrow ditch, and for the love of dry socks, don't let the canvas touch anything sharp. The second it does surface, tension breaks and the rain takes the invitation. You count the seconds between thunder and the flash-pure habit even if you don't plan to write a weather report. Muggy air presses close. Droplets kick little puffs of earth up through the ground sheet. Someone outside tugs a guy line and your whole wall leans inward as though the tent is trying to hug you for comfort. It's sweet except the hug is clammy, and its hands are made of rain. A joke soft as a yawn. If this were a luxury resort, the brochure would advertise open concept skylight with immersive hydration experience. You chuckle just enough to forget that your elbow is auditioning for a role as a sponge. Practical routine returns, you loosen the flap at the bottom to let air flow, because stale breath and damp wool produce a funk that history books mercifully do not scratch and sniff. You prop the door with a short stick to create a drip edge, a miniature awning where drops can leap to their doom outside. You slide your boots under your pack to keep them from filling like bird baths. The trick taught by someone who learned from someone older still is to decide which part of you gets wet on purpose. Sacrifice your sleeve to save your torso, your hat brim to save your face, your pride to save your sleep. Debate flickers in your head as the candle gutters low. Were leather Roman tents truly superior in storms, or did canvas A-frames breathe better and thus dry faster? Scholars sift procurement records, surviving fragments, and period illustrations. A few argue that leather shrank and stiffened, causing seams to gap in repeated deluges. Others point out that canvas rots if you pack it wet and march for days. The evidence, like your blanket tonight, remains thin in places, but everyone agrees on one thing: soldiers learned a relationship with their tents. Pitch, tighten, adjust, listen. Tents talk. They pop and groan in gusts, murmur when the ropes want slack snap, when pegs need to be reset. You, half asleep, become a storm whisperer out of necessity. Your eyelids finally lower slow like drawbridges, while rain smooths its rhythm from angry to steady to almost soothing. The wind softens, the flap rests. The drip relocates to the far corner where it can interrogate a puddle in peace. Your breathing matches the canvas's gentle rise and fall. A little comfort sneaks in your cloak, though damp is warm against your neck. Your rolled tunic makes a tolerable pillow. Your friend's snores are predictably spaced, a metronome for drowsiness. Cozy is a strong word, but you're willing to meet it halfway across a muddy field. And then, because war adores timing, you hear it. The thin, distant trumpet cutting through rain, or maybe a drum rolling like low thunder from the picket line. The sound threads the night slides under the tent wall and settles right behind your eardrum. You sit up too fast and bump the ridgepole, sending a fresh sprinkle down your collar. Because of course you do. Is it an alarm, a signal to rotate the watch? Or only the quartermaster practicing a call he swears he has perfect? You can't tell. Your heart asks for answers. The storm, unhelpful, provides percussion. You tighten your cloak, wipe the drip from your brow, and listen again. The notes fade, then return, then stop, like the trumpets trying to give you mixed feelings on purpose. Around you, bodies shift and whisper. Someone says it's nothing. Someone else says it's something. You lie back, you count the beats, you start to drift. But just as sleep threads its way between raindrops and settles lightly over your eyes, a voice outside names a new task that will pull you into the wet night. Because the next source of warmth tonight isn't inside a tent at all, it's by the fire, and that comes with its own smoky bargain. The rain may stop, but the smoke never does. Tonight, instead of dripping canvas, you're greeted by the grey haze of a campfire that seems determined to tuck itself under every cloak and blanket. Soldiers across centuries have known this routine. If you want warmth, you will also inhale the forest. The logs crackle, sparks drift into the black sky, and a dozen figures huddle close shoulders, pressed faces half glowing orange and half fading into shadow. You lean nearer, because the alternative is shivering, and soon your wool tunic is wearing the night's aroma like a permanent badge. Mainstream fat campfires weren't optional, they were survival. Roman camps dug shallow pits, lined them with stones, and built fires in calculated rows, so smoke rose evenly without filling tents. Medieval armies relied on communal blazes, feeding them with whatever brush or timber was at hand. By the Napoleonic Wars, regulations even specified how many men to a fire, usually 6 to 12, ensuring a shared circle of heat and chores. Soldiers roasted meagre rations, dried boots stiff with mud, and sometimes warmed spear points just to keep the metal from brittling in the frost. Fire wasn't only warmth, it was infrastructure. Quirky tidbit soot blankets. Soldiers often discovered their cloaks grew so infused with smoke that they became almost waterproof. There are accounts of Civil War men joking that they could roll their coats into sausages, they were so stiff with soot and grease. Medieval levies sometimes used their smoky blankets as improvised mosquito deterrents, wrapping themselves like human incense sticks. Some even believed breathing a bit of ash at night toughened the lungs, though modern medicine would kindly disagree. And yet on those endless marches, the soldier with the blackest cloak might also be the driest one. Scholarly debate lingers on how much firelight affected morale versus physical survival. Some historians argue that smoke-drenched nights damaged health, leading to chronic coughs, inflamed eyes, and worse. Others emphasize the psychological anchor. The glow of flames offered a sense of community protection against prowlers and rhythm, for songs that carried across dark valleys. Were soldiers bonding more deeply through shared smoke, or were they simply tolerating each other's hacking? Perhaps both. Diaries brim with contradictions. One soldier praises the comfort of crackling flame, while another curses the choking smog that steals the breath of sleep. Breathe it in. The smell of resin, the tang of green wood hissing the faint undertone of horse manure someone mistakenly added as fuel. Your chest rises slow, your eyelids lower, slower, lulled by the combined lullaby of snapping wood and muffled conversations fading into murmurs. You try to tuck your cloak against the sparks because one ember can eat through wool like a moth with ambition, but you also welcome the gentle kiss of heat on your boots. There's a rhythm fire pops, men shift, sparks climb, sighs settle. A strange comfort in the middle of nowhere. Of course, soldiers also had to deal with the placement of these fires. Too many too close, and you risked announcing your army's size to the enemy, like a billboard glowing on the hillside. Too few and men froze. Commanders experimented, sometimes ordering no fires at all in hostile territory, forcing soldiers to wrap themselves in clammy cloaks and try to dream of warmth instead. Was it more dangerous to be spotted or to be stiff with cold? Your commander didn't always care which option ruined your night. One last joke before you nod off. Campfire smoke clings so faithfully that, according to one British officer in the Peninsular War, a soldier could be tracked in darkness by his smell alone. Imagine being ambushed not by sight or sound, but because the enemy sniffed your smoky cloak on the wind. That's not camouflage. That's reverse camouflage. You shift uneasily, pull the fabric closer and tell yourself the enemy's nose is probably stuffed. The fire sinks lower. Embers glow like lazy stars scattered on the ground, the heat lessening, the smoke thinning. Men lean back one by one, chins tucked, hats over eyes. Sleep arrives wrapped in soot, heavy but fragile. You almost surrender to it when, of course, a sergeant's voice cuts through. Your turn at the watch. You open one eye, then both as the warmth vanishes from your future. Because the next part of a soldier's night wasn't just lying by the fire. It was standing guard, eyes open, heart steady, staring into darkness that seemed determined to stare back. You step away from the fire's last orange sigh, and into the wide black mouth of the night where sound travels farther than light, and every small noise rearranges your spine. Guard duty, the universal pause button on sleep. You wrap your cloak tighter, feel the damp hem, kiss your calves and take your place on the line. Somewhere to your left, a horse answers the darkness with a slow whicker. Somewhere to your right, boots shuffle in gravel. Directly ahead, only the shape of trees stitched against a sky with not enough stars. The air tastes like iron and wet ash, and you start counting breaths because counting sheep would spook the picket. Mainstream historical fact armies divided the night into watches, slices of wakefulness assigned like chores. Roman legions marked 4 vigilia, roughly 3 hours each from early dusk to dawn. A tesserarius made the rounds with the watchword, and the duty rotated so no sentry stayed sleepless every night. Medieval hosts did the same by custom, rather than clock-posting sentries at road streams and the low places where fog collects and enemies like to sneak. Early modern armies set grand rounds, officers inspecting posts at irregular hours to keep you honest. In theory, you stand still, see far, hear everything, and crucially, do not fall asleep. In practice, the human eyelid has its own agenda. Quirky tidbit soldiers invented all sorts of low-tech alarms to keep themselves conscious. Some chewed coffee beans when available, or nibbled raw onion like a midnight dare. Others tucked a pebble under the tongue not to improve diction like ancient orators, but to keep jaws moving just enough to fend off the lull. More theatrical souls pricked a finger with a pin fixed to the hat brim, an urgent reminder that drooping heads and sharp objects should not meet. In bitter winters, men tied a jingle of scrap metal to their scabbards so any nodding slump rattled them awake, a personal curfew bell with poor musical taste. And when nothing else worked, they traded small favours for whispered stories because an engaged brain blinks more than a bored one. Historians still argue whether short frequent watches or longer fewer ones kept soldiers readier for battle. Some campaign diaries praise 2-hour rotations, brief enough to fight sleep, kind to circulation. Others show commanders preferring 4 hours, fewer changeovers, less confusion, more time to actually rest between turns. The debate widens. In trench-heavy wars did the famous stand to at dawn and dusk, when attacks were most likely help, or merely add stress to already frayed nerves. Uneven sources, conflicting recollections, and the small matter of weather make a tidy answer elusive. What emerges clearly, a pattern of improvisation. Armies pretended the night obeyed rules. The night pretended it didn't hear. You settle into the rhythm of noticing. Brush murmurs when wind passes through it. Water ticks somewhere, a patient drip from leaf to leaf. Far away, a dog barks twice and then thinks better of it. Your ears stretch out like tent ropes into the dark, and your eyes do that strange night vision thing where shapes appear, vanish, and reappear as different shapes. The mind supplies details the moon forgot to send. Was that a man or a bush with ambitions? You shift your weight, the leather creaks, and your heart misreads your own sound as someone else's. You exhale slowly, partly to calm yourself, and partly to watch the pale ribbon of breath drift. If it drifts sideways, wind's picked up. If it drifts nowhere, fog is building. Either way, it's company. Routine wraps itself around you. Step to the left, boundary stone turn count paces to the right, boundary stake turn again. Every so often a corporal of the guard ghosts by nods and melts back into shadow, leaving you with the reassuring knowledge that someone else is sleepless too. You whisper the countersign to yourself to keep it sharp on your tongue. Passwords change nightly in some armies. In others, they're reused so often that even the owls could guess them. The countersign itself always sounds dramatic in the firelight valor victory summer, and gently ridiculous at 3 a.m. in a drizzle. Imagine challenging a bush with valor. It's not the bush that answers, it's your own echo. You feel the cold sneak in at the wrists and ankles first, where cloth ends and patience begins. You flex fingers, stamp toes inside stiff boots, and remind your body that circulation is a team sport. There's a reason sentry boxes in paintings look like miniature houses wind is a gossip and loves to talk directly to bones. Where there are no boxes, soldiers borrow geography, stand on the lee side of a wagon wheel behind a boulder, inside a ditch that's marginally drier than its neighbours. You pick your spot like a bird picking a branch, then pretend you belong there. The loudest sounds are often behind you in camp. A pot lid clinks, embers sigh, a soldier coughs the ferny cough of a man who has known too much smoke and not enough mint tea. The quiet ahead is the quiet you negotiate with. You promise to keep it if it promises not to surprise you. Time loosens, stretches, then zigzags. Minutes grow long legs and wander off. Seconds fold like paper cranes and sit on your shoulder, flitting whenever you blink. 2 hours feels like a polite estimate invented by a person who has never met a cloud. Touch joins the watch. The spear haft warms under your palm. The cloak's nap grows rough along the neck where damp becomes frost. When you glance up, the sky has rotated itself so a new patch of stars hangs over the tree line. In some campaigns, bells mark the passing watches. In others, drums. In still others, the only clock is a captain's bad mood. You prefer the subtle clock-distant surf if you're near a coast, its hush and drag counting out the world's oldest metronome, or a marsh's night choir frogs and insects discussing unmentionable topics with loud enthusiasm. The ocean especially softens your edges. Its breath becomes your breath. You almost drift. A memory floats up as reliably as missed punishments for sleeping on post. Severe in many codes. Too severe, some scholars insist, pointing to brutal articles of war that frightened more than they deterred. Others reply that an entire army could die because one sentry slipped into a dream about hot stew, so the harshness kept real horrors at bay. The documents disagree over frequency. Was execution common or a dramatic rarity? Numbers are foggy. Rhetoric is clear. Your brain wisely decides that tonight you're going to be a model of wakefulness, which is also something sleepy. Brains love to declare just before they try napping with their eyes open. You try a trick name 5 smells: wet wool, wood ash, old leather, cold iron, crushed grass, 4 textures, canvas, edge, knotty spear, shaft, slick buckle, gritty glove, 3 far-off sounds, a stream conversationally tripping over stones, a horse rearranging its hay, a nightjar snipping the dark, 2 things you can see the white of your breath, the pale stripe where path meets meadow, 1 thing you can taste old onion bravely surviving. The grounding works. For a minute you're more here than tired. Then the grand rounds arrive. A lantern hood lifts briefly 1, 2, 3 heartbeats, and a low voice asks the countersign. You deliver it. You receive a muttered carry-on. The light slides away, leaving after images that insist trees are now men, and men are now trees again. You blink them into obedience. You take 10 slow breaths to file the world back into its folders. Even jokes tread softly at this hour, but you allow one guard duty is like working the graveyard shift, literally. The punchline is quiet because the dead are reputed to have impeccable hearing. You grin barely, and even that small warmth helps. Minutes collect into a little cairn. You add the last stone by listening hard enough to hear your pulse. Then from very far left a note rises thin at first, then clearer. The tentative call of a horn trying out morning's first syllables. It falters, returns, steadies. The line around you stirs. Somewhere in camp a cook curses affectionately at a stubborn pot. Somewhere else a drummer pinches his sticks and taps a question the horn will answer. Your relief approaches footsteps, measured cloak scuffing the wet grass. You hand over the post stretch until your joints remember they're yours, and feel the night release you like a book closing. You start back toward the faint glow of banked coals, the smell of yesterday's smoke curling up to meet you, the thought of blanket and straw growing sweeter with each step. Your eyes have that sandy feeling, your shoulders the heavy tiredness that promises deep sleep. But even as you duck the guy lines and the tent wall brushes your sleeve, a familiar tremor runs through the camp, the pre-dawn hush pulling tighter, the air bracing as if the whole world is taking one long inhalation. Because the next sound is not a whisper or a drip or a fire's sigh. It's the trumpet at dawn, sharp as sunlight about to slice open whatever sleep you thought you'd earned. The trumpet arrives like a knife made of sound, shrill, cold, merciless. It doesn't care if you just found a sweet dream, or if your body finally negotiated with the damp straw to grant 5 minutes of comfort. The horn blasts and suddenly the entire camp is awake, or at least trying to pretend it is. You sit up, rub your eyes, and feel the weight of a night that never offered enough. Dawn in an army camp has a particular cruelty. The world is grey, the dew is cold, and the first thing you smell is yesterday's fire mixed with today's boots. Mainstream historical fact, trumpets, horns, and drums have been the alarm clocks of armies for millennia. Roman legions used the bucina, a curved brass horn, to signal watches' movements and wake-ups. Medieval armies borrowed from both Roman tradition and local instruments, hunting horns, trumpets, even bagpipes in certain regions. By the early modern period, each army had its codified calls, short musical phrases every soldier was supposed to recognize instantly. The British Army's revel literally means wake up a tradition carried into modern militaries. Imagine a tune so famous it ruins your dreams for centuries. Quirky tidbit, not all wake-ups were musical. Some armies relied on the simplest alarm of all, the sergeant with the loudest voice and the heaviest stick. Chronicles from the 30 Years' War mention officers walking the camp rows, kicking boots or banging pots, a method that guaranteed resentment but also results. In the American Civil War, drummers as young as 12 carried the duty of rousing regiments with a brisk tattoo. And in places where instruments were scarce, soldiers devised their own rhythms, clapping rattling tin cups, or even imitating rooster calls just to get everyone moving. Somewhere in history, a rooster was out of a job because Private Smith decided to crow louder. Historians still argue whether the soundscape of dawn was more about coordination or morale. Was the trumpet blast meant primarily as a clear tactical signal, ensuring thousands of men rose together? Or was it also psychological, an audible reminder that order still existed, that the camp's chaos could be organized by one shared note? Some diaries suggest soldiers dreaded the horn because it meant labor drilling or marching. Others hint at relief, a sound that cut through uncertainty, marking the end of the longest, slowest hours of the night. Perhaps the truth is that a trumpet at dawn was both enemy and friend, depending on how well you slept before it. You crawl from the tent or roll off your blanket, the grass damp enough to soak your socks instantly. The sky is streaked with that reluctant light, pale as watered milk, and the first bird calls weave a counterpoint to the military music. Around you, men shuffle like half-broken puppets, some yawning, some muttering curses under their breath. One fellow soldier manages to fall asleep sitting upright, even as the horn continues, head nodding in rhythm with the notes, a grim talent, perfected only in armies. You envy him, then laugh because his snore harmonizes terribly with the tune. Imagine the sensory layers, the horn's brassy vibration rattling the inside of your chest, the smell of dew and smoke mingling like old wool steeped in tea, the feel of your body stretching in complaint after hours on unforgiving ground. You rub a hand across your face and taste salt sweat and a trace of ash from the fire. Your ears ring not only with the music but with the memory of silence that preceded it. And all around, boots begin stomping, kettles clanking, commands barked. The camp shifts from dream to motion in the space of 30 seconds. A light joke travels down the line. That horn player must hate us more than the enemy. Another man replies, "No, he just loves mornings more than sanity." You chuckle because humour is the cheapest breakfast, and also because you suspect the horn player's tent is the safest in camp. No one dares retaliate against the one who controls the snooze button of history. Scholarly arguments aside, you realise that this moment, the trumpet-cutting dawn, is one of the most universal soldier experiences across cultures. Whether it's a Roman cornicin, a medieval herald, a Napoleonic bugler, or a Civil War drummer, the principle is the same. The day has no patience for your pillow, even if your pillow is only a folded cloak. The army does not wait for you to feel rested. It demands you rise because the sun has, and often before the sun does. The music fades, replaced by commands and footfalls. You shake straw from your cloak, sling your pack across aching shoulders, and blink against the growing light. You tell yourself the day will pass quickly, that tonight you might actually sleep, that maybe rain or trumpets or sergeants will spare you just once. Your optimism is as thin as your blanket, but is there a thread to hold on to? And just as you begin to think the worst is over, that waking up to a horn is the lowest point of soldierly sleep, you remember where you'll be trying to rest tonight. Not in a tent, not by a fire, not even under a sky, but inside cold stone walls that echo every sound like a bell, where cloaks are thin and drafts are thick. Stone. That's the first thing you feel. Not the polished tiled stone of palaces, but the raw, indifferent slabs of castles, fortresses, and citadels. Soldiers who earned the luxury of sleeping indoors often discovered that walls which stopped arrows also trapped drafts, that floors which held banners in daylight became freezing platforms at night. You walk into a keep after a long march, the sound of boots echoing as if the walls themselves are whispering your exhaustion back at you. You set down your gear, stretch your back, and realize the chamber is as warm as the inside of a stone jug left in a stream. Mainstream historical fact castles were not cozy havens. Medieval soldiers billeted inside fortresses usually slept in great halls, guard rooms, or under vaults near the gatehouse. Bedding was simple straw pallets laid directly on planks or flagstones, often shared by pairs or trios. The straw absorbed some damp, some fleas, and some misery, but not all. In the later Middle Ages, wealthier officers might have feather mattresses, while ordinary troops made do with bundles of rushes. During sieges, even nobles sometimes abandoned their beds for the floor because the danger of collapsing walls or fires demanded readiness. Quirky tidbit: the thicker the walls, the worse the drafts. Many castles had narrow slits for windows, arrow loops by day, wind funnels by night. Soldiers learned to stuff cloth into cracks, hang cloaks like makeshift curtains, or even pile shields against openings to block the icy air. Chronicles describe guards huddled in corners, backs pressed to stone ovens, after cooks had finished savouring residual warmth, like cats stealing heat from a stove. Some garrisons kept dogs not only for guarding, but also for body heat living blankets that growled if you hogged too much space. Imagine being woken not by a trumpet, but by a sheepdog kicking you in the ribs because you rolled into its tail. Historians still argue whether billeting in castles was more comfortable than camp life. Some point to access to kitchens, fireplaces, and roofs overheads as obvious improvements. Others counter that damp stone bred rheumatism, smoke from poor chimneys choked lungs, and vermin thrived in straw bedding left unchanged for weeks. Diaries reveal contradictions. One knight praises a secure rest in chambers of strength, while a footman from the same campaign laments the cursed cold that no fire may soften. Security and misery often arrive together, a package deal. Close your eyes here and let the soundscape unfold: the drip of water through mortar cracks, the rattle of a loose shutter in the tower, the groan of timbers overhead when the wind pushes against them. You lie on your straw cloak, pulled high ears, adjusting to the peculiar acoustics of stone. Every cough is magnified, every snore becomes an avalanche, and every whispered conversation trickles across the hall like a stream. Privacy vanishes. You sleep inside an echo chamber where other men's dreams intrude on yours. You turn, you adjust, you fluff straw that does not fluff. You tell yourself the hardness beneath is strengthening your spine like medieval chiropractic therapy. A soldier beside you mutters in his sleep, calling for bread for ale for someone named Margaret. Another jolts awake and insists he heard footsteps in the corridor. You half believe him because the castle has its own nocturnal noises: rats pattering, owls nesting in the rafters, guards shifting at the gate below. These structures outlive their builders, and at night you feel like an uninvited guest in a building that remembers more sieges than birthdays. And then comes the irony: the fire. Yes, the hall often boasts a hearth big enough to roast an ox, but the heat escapes upward into the rafters, leaving the floor in a twilight chill. Men nearest the flames sweat. Men at the edges curse the cold. Sparks fly, smoke drifts sideways, and your eyes water just enough to remind you of last night's smoky cloak. You shuffle closer, risk catching an ember hole in your blanket, and decide it's worth it if you can thaw your toes. A gentle joke arises: castles were built to withstand enemies, not to host sleepovers. If Airbnb had medieval listings, the reviews would read stunning views, strong walls, but no stars for comfort. Draft killed my blanket. You smile to yourself, a private humour in a public misery. You almost drift. The stone presses firm, the fire hums low, and the steady breathing of comrades creates a lull. Your mind drifts to the illusion of safety, thick walls, guarded gates, no rain dripping on your nose tonight. But safety is a thin blanket. The castle, after all, is built for war. You remember that enemies know where fortresses stand and siege engines do not respect bedtimes. A thud in the distance. Was it a door, or something heavier outside the wall? Your breath catches your eyes open, the straw rustles beneath you. Sleep dangles just out of reach, because the next night you won't even have a castle floor. You'll lie directly on mud wrapped in nothing more than a bedroll, and the ground itself will be your only mattress. You lower yourself to the earth the way a weary ship slides into harbour, slow, creaking, resigned. The ground answers with a polite squelch that says, "Welcome, traveller. I am mud. I will be your mattress, your chiropractor, and your souvenir." You unroll your bedroll like a magician revealing his best trick, except tonight. The trick is simply less cold than before. Wool on oilcloth, cloak over wool, you over everything, layering hope between you and the planet. The sky hangs low, damp as a washed cloak that never found the sun, and the air carries that mineral smell of turned soil and crushed grass that soldiers in every century have tried and failed to forget. Mainstream historical fact for most foot soldiers, across eras bed meant a blanket roll on the ground. Romans carried the sarcina gear bundled on a forked staff with a woolen blanket, and sometimes an extra cloak. No feather mattress, but wool traps heat, even when damp, which is nature's apology for rain. Medieval troops often slept under their mantles. Cloaks doubled as both daytime garment and nighttime cover. Early modern and Napoleonic soldiers hauled a blanket and greatcoat sometimes with a bit of straw borrowed from a nearby farm return policy nun. By the 19th century, many carried a groundcloth oilcloth or rubberized gum blanket in the American Civil War to keep damp from leaching into bones. In the 20th, a shelter half and poncho might serve as ground sheet and top cover. Across it all, the constant is contact with the earth you slept where you stopped. Quirky tidbit soldiers became enthusiastic interior designers of dirt. A few shovelfuls transform a rut into a trenchlet just wide enough for hips, so shoulders and knees don't wage a nightly civil war. Others warm a river stone by the fire, wrap it in spare cloth and tuck it at their feet like a sleepy cat. A primitive hot water bottle that sometimes works a little too well. Scorched socks are historically widespread. There's the saddlebag pillow universally celebrated until you remember what the horse eats and where the bag sits. Some men swear by pine-bound mattresses springy aromatic and only mildly prickly, while step riders heap dried dung under groundcloth for insulation. It's resourceful, it's warm, and it is nobody's favourite bedtime story. You learn quickly that comfort is not a single object. It's a stack of tiny hacks, hat brim as rain gutter bayonet as tent peg, spare shirt as ear-warmer knapsack as fortress wall against a rude breeze. Historians still argue whether bivouacking directly on the ground actually hurt health, as much as period doctors warned. Contemporary officers often blamed night air and damp for fevers. Modern scholars counter that sanitation and close quarters, not the earth itself, spread disease in camps. Others note that chronic exposure to wet and cold certainly worsened rheumatism and chest complaints, even if it didn't cause fevers in the miasma sense. There's also debate over the trade-off between speed and shelter armies that marched light and slept rough moved faster. Armies that insisted on full tentage arrived safer, but later. Campaign journals cheerfully supply evidence for both strategies like footnotes written with muddy boots. You arrange your little kingdom ground sheet down seams sloping gently so water can make graceful exits. Blanket unfolded with the nap running the right way. Cloak angled to shed wind. You tamp a shallow trough along the high side because you've learned that water obeys gravity, not intentions. Rations bag becomes a pillow, but you pad the hard angles with a rolled tunic so your ear doesn't wake you with a complaint filed in triplicate. You slide boots under the cloak to keep them from turning into ponds overnight, then loosen the laces so morning feet won't stage a mutiny. The choreography feels practiced because it is soldiers rehearse sleep the way they rehearse battle, a drill of straps and knots. Corners and corners again. Listen. Insects carry on a nocturne, tiny fiddles soaring in the ditch, a cricket that insists on soloing a beetle that believes in percussion. Farther off, a bell in a village keeps time for people who are allowed to dream. Closer still, the camp breathes low talk, a spoon ticking a mess tin, a horse tearing grass with soft wet rips. The ground itself emits news, diminishing warmth. Where the fire's reach ends, the slight give, where roots weave a secret hammock beneath soil. Your body translates all this into status reports. Back says the earth is honest. Hips say it is very honest. Shoulders bargain for a folded cloak. You position your spine like a cartographer finding the perfect compromise between river and road. You pull the cloak to your chin, and the wool gathers your exhaled warmth like a small hoard. A joke arrives, sleepy and kind. You're trying to get 8 hours of rest on the world's biggest firm, mattress brand name planet. No return policy, no pillow top lifetime guarantee of interesting lumps. You almost smile. Humour is a thin blanket, but it stretches. A fact you feel rather than read heat leaves by contact. That's why even a slim barrier oilcloth pine bows an extra shirt, transforms a freezing night into a survivable one. Veterans know to elevate the hips a finger's width with a coil of rope or a folded scarf, just enough to stop blood from sulking in one achy place. They place hands inside armpits or under thighs to preserve dexterity for the inevitable midnight scramble. They turn socks inside out, tuck them beneath the shirt next to the body, and wake to something almost dry, almost being one of the soldier's most used words. You drift for a moment, and the earth, despite its posture, tries to be kind. It steadies your heartbeat, steals your tension, pretends to be a bed. Your thoughts thin into the simple arithmetic of warmth, cloak, plus blanket, plus breath and patience. You think of a Roman legionary humming himself towards sleep under unfamiliar stars, a Burgundian archer listening for owls beyond his hedge, a conscript on a bleak plain poncho snapping at the edges like a flag. Different centuries, same bargain. You trade comfort for proximity to the road that carries your fate. A soft disagreement among scholars flickers at the edge of drowsiness. Were soldiers better rested when they cuddled closer under shared covers? Yes. Body heat or worse, no snoring and elbows. Evidence piles on both sides. Diaries admit to bundling in cold snaps 2 or 3 men under overlapped blankets, a practical decision wrapped in awkwardness. Other accounts describe fights over blankets and the artistry of strategic blanket, stealing a discipline in which promotion was based on stealth rather than bravery. Your solution tonight is the ancient one. You compromise with a neighbour. You keep the truce by keeping to your side. The insects' orchestra dims as a faint breeze combs the grass, and your blanket pulls a temperature trick you cherish. It feels warmer because you want it to, which is half the physics of soldiering. Your eyelids lower. The mud's chill becomes background noise. Even the pebble you failed to relocate under your left shoulder transforms from a critic into a character, a small, lumpy reminder that you're still present, still anchored. The present is a nice place to nap when tomorrow is loud. You're almost gone, breathing slow fingers, unclenching jaw, slackening into a more generous version of your face, when someone's boot nudges your calf. The nudge is gentle in the way thunder is gentle when it begins very far away. A whisper follows, threaded with apology and duty. Up. Your turn. You blink at the stars, which blink back innocently as if they didn't sign the watch bill. The earth receives your sigh without comment. Your blanket surrenders your warmth like a grudge it intended to keep. You sit, roll tie, sling motions, learned so well your hands could do them while your brain files a complaint. You stand feeling where the ground marked you thin lines of damp on the cloak, a constellation of grass seeds on your sleeve, the memory of one stubborn pebble that will absolutely be promoted to officer tomorrow. You take one last look at the square of earth that almost pretended to be a bed. It remains a square of earth, because sleep on mud is generous but conditional, and the condition is always the same. Night watches rotate. Your warmth is now a loan you must repay by staring into the dark while others dream. You've only just laid your head down, finally convinced that the mud can be bargained with when the gentle tap on your boot or the sharp whisper of your name yanks you upright. It's your turn. The warmth you've carefully hoarded under cloak and blanket is no longer yours. It belongs to the next watch, the next duty. You tighten straps, pull your cloak tighter, and step back into the night's drafty corridors. Sleep rotates in armies like rations never enough, always temporary and rarely satisfying. Mainstream historical fact, armies divided watches through rotation, making sure men shared the burden of guarding the camp at night. Romans established a system of 4 vigiliae per night, each 3 hours long. Medieval armies did the same. More loosely captains split their men into groups, assigning first watch, middle watch, and last watch. By the Napoleonic era, watch rotations were strictly regulated, sometimes accompanied by written duty rosters, so there could be no accidental forgetfulness. The point was balance. No soldier could complain too much because everyone eventually lost their chance at sleep. Quirky tidbit soldiers invented bizarre ways of trading or evading watches. A bribe of extra bread, a promise to write a letter home for an illiterate comrade, or even a carved trinket could buy you someone else's shift. In medieval chronicles, there are stories of men faking illness, wrapping cloth around their heads to appear feverish, only to be caught snoring 5 minutes later. One 18th century French regiment developed a reputation for phantom watches. Men would sneak out of camp, circle back, and claim they had patrolled while actually napping in a haystack. The punishment double watch duty, which in soldier math equals a very bad investment. Historians still argue whether rotations improved vigilance or simply spread exhaustion evenly. Some evidence suggests that dividing the night too finely left everyone bleary-eyed, unable to function at dawn. Other records argue that long watches 3 or 4 hours were more dangerous because soldiers inevitably succumbed to fatigue midway through. Was it better to give men tiny sips of sleep or one gulp? The debate hasn't ended, and it mirrors every commander's ancient headache. You can win battles with discipline, but you lose them with yawns. The sensory details of rotation are unforgettable. You feel the rough shake on your shoulder, the muttered your turn, and the cruel chill of air rushing in as you leave your blanket. The ground beneath your feet is stiff with frost or soft with mud, either way unfriendly. You walk through camp hearing groans of relief from those who just finished their stint, their cloaks steaming faintly as they collapse back into bundles of straw. You take your place along the perimeter, the fire behind you, the unknown ahead. Every sound, the cough of a horse, the creak of a tree, the shifting of men in their sleep, feels amplified in the fragile quiet. You try to keep your eyes open. Some chew on hard bread, some pace small circles, some mutter prayers, others hum old songs. The goal is simple. Avoid slipping into that treacherous in-between state where you think you're awake, but you're already dreaming with your eyes half open. Every army has tales of disasters narrowly averted because a soldier fought off that drift and spotted a shadow moving where it shouldn't. And every army also has records of what happens when someone didn't. The punishments for sleeping on watch were legendary, not because commanders enjoyed cruelty, but because an entire camp's life could hinge on one man's drowsiness. Humour sneaks in because soldiers find jokes even in the bleakest turns. In one 17th century English army, men would nudge each other awake by saying, "Your sweetheart's come to visit," because nothing jolts a weary soldier faster than imaginary romance. In the American Civil War, it was common to poke fun at comrades who nodded off by threatening to tie tin cups to their belts, so every step jingled. The banter carried men through, each joke a small lantern against the dark. And then comes the cruel irony of rotation. By the time you've fought to stay awake, paced the same stretch of road 100 times, and handed off your post to the next poor soul, sleep refuses to return. You crawl back under your cloak, but your body is wired, your heart still alert to every twig snap. The camp snores around you, yet your own eyes refuse to close. Sleep delayed is sometimes sleep denied. You roll onto your side, stare into the darkness, and listen to the familiar chorus boots, shifting cloaks, rustling men, sighing horses, snorting. The rhythm of an army at half rest, half ready. You tell yourself you'll drift soon, that fatigue always wins eventually. And maybe you do for a moment before the night itself interrupts. A sound cuts through louder than snores, stranger than wind. Not enemy, not trumpet, but something closer, more human. The booming, unholy rumble of a snoring sergeant nearby, louder than all the drums in the world. And that is where the next ordeal of soldiers' sleep begins. You return from watch with sleep cupped carefully in both hands, only to have a sound like a sawmill fall on it from a great height. The sergeant, 2 bedrolls over, begins his nightly concert. A deep, ground-shaking snore that starts in his boots, rumbles up through his ribs, and exits his nose like a bull deciding to learn the trumpet. The tent canvas actually quivers. A moth abandons its life goals. You stare into the dark with the face of someone who has paid for a quiet room and received front-row tickets to a lumberjack competition. Around you, men adjust cloaks and invent new prayers, mostly about silence. The sergeant inhales, pauses a moment of blissful hush, and then detonates again. Sleep, which had been inching toward you with a timid hello, sprints away in terror. Mainstream historical fact, soldiers slept shoulder to shoulder, cheek by jowl, and sometimes nose to nose in almost every era. Roman legionaries packed 6 to 8 men into a leather tent. Papilio, medieval footmen, shared straw pallets in halls or cramped ridge tents, and early modern armies gave 2 to 4 men a shelter. Half worth of space, barely an arm's span between mouths and mischief. In the American Civil War diaries moan about snorting like swine, while Napoleonic memoirs groan that a veteran's nasal orchestra could drown the tambour. Packed close for warmth and security, you also inherited everybody's sounds, coughs, murmurs, teeth, grinding dream speeches, and yes, snoring with the ambition of thunderstorms. Commanders could order lights out, they could not order noses to behave. Quirky tidbit improvised ear stoppers were common wherever wool existed. Men rolled tiny twists of wool or linen, dipped them in tallow or wax if they could spare it, and stuffed their ears just enough to blunt the racket without missing alarms. Some swore by bread pellets, a questionable choice in mouse-prone camps, but reportedly effective for one night before they disintegrated or worse got eaten. Medieval soldiers tied hoods lower and wrapped scarf-like brays around their heads so cloth muffled the roar. On long campaigns, comrades negotiated snore clauses. You take the far side of the tent, you sleep with your head by the door, you owe me a share of tomorrow's rations, if you keep a whole village awake. A few units adopted the delicate art of the snore nudge, a synchronized gentle boot tap administered by whichever victim lay closest, timed with mercy and a sense of rhythm. If the sergeant rumbled in, B-flat 3 taps tried to coax him into C less bass, more lullaby. Results were mixed, comedy was high. Historians still argue whether snoring in period sources signals true respiratory issues or merely narrative flourish for comic effect. Some medical historians point to chronic smoke exposure, broken noses from drill or brawls, and badly healed colds as likely causes. Others note that writers often exaggerated camp noises to entertain readers and to emphasize hardship. There's debate too about sleep quality under communal conditions. Did familiarity with camp soundscapes help soldiers drift off more easily than modern readers assume, or did cumulative noise lead to persistent sleep debt that affected battle performance? Evidence is scattered like straw letters that joke orders, that scold surgeons' notes that rarely mention snoring because they were busy with more obvious problems. Either way, your ears insist it's a problem tonight. Bells thread the darkness from a distant village, slow-measured notes counting an hour you were hoping to spend unconscious. The bell motif turns the tent into a strange duet, the sergeant's basso drone, and that far metal heartbeat. You try to time your breaths between his. Inhale on his exhale, exhale when he reloads. For 3 cycles it works. On the 4th, he surprises everyone with a snorking flourish, the kind that sounds like a jug band swallowing a wasp, and your lungs panic and forget the choreography. A boot somewhere thumps the ground in protest. A gentler voice whispers, "Let him rest." He was on the flank all day. Compassion is a warm blanket that doesn't fully cover your ears, but you pull it up anyway. You experiment. Cloak pulled higher over the side of your head muffles the treble, not the bass. Turn on your other side, now the snore attacks the opposite ear with renewed ambition. Roll onto your back, immediately unacceptable. The ground lodges a formal complaint in the Department of Shoulders. You fold a corner of ground sheet like a little wing to deflect airflow, hoping physics also applies to acoustics. You hum very quietly, matching the note of the bell. For a second, the sergeant harmonizes by accident, and the absurd beauty of it almost makes you laugh, which would disqualify you from sleep indefinitely. Practical tricks parade through memory, loosen your jaw, unclench your eyelids, flex toes once, then let them go. Count backward from a high number using only odd numbers, because the mind detests imperfection and wears itself out trying to tidy the sequence. Conjure a slow picture grain pouring from a sack, a river sliding past willow trunks, the bells sway, like a pendulum moving light through air. The tent cools, the snore warms. You begin to understand why some soldiers insisted on sleeping by the door even in winter. The cold draught is a lower price than tonight's symphony. Another laugh quiet in some regiments, the snoring man was so notorious he became a strategic asset. One captain is said to have placed his resident thunder snorer at the outermost tent on purpose, arguing that no enemy scout would dare approach a noise so confident. "Sounds like 3 bears," he reportedly said. Let them think we've domesticated a few, maybe apocryphal, maybe true. Either way, the thought makes you smile into your cloak. If only the bears came with an off switch. The shared bedroll arrangement adds layers to the crisis. If you and a partner lie head to foot, as many did to save space and dignity, the snore arrives from knee level like a subterranean creature. If you lie cheek to cheek, you compete nose to nose with an invisible wind instrument. Men argue, then apologize. Someone's elbow becomes a metronome tapped to a chest with good intentions and poor diplomacy. In harsher codes, the victim risks a charge for striking a superior even with a nudge. So the tent invents a democracy of size and entire electorate voting with exhalations for the bill titled Quiet Please. What do the books say about discipline and sleep in the face of noise? Orders exist that scold unseemly disturbances, especially in garrison towns, where civil authorities heard more than they liked. Yet few punishments target snoring specifically, because even a provost knows you cannot flog a man's palate into obedience. Some units practice staggered bedtimes, a portion turning in earlier, so the first wave would be fully asleep, and thereby immune for the second wave's racket. Others assigned the worst offenders to guard rooms or passageways on purpose, trading their noise for drafts and distance. You consider volunteering for that duty tomorrow, just to bargain for silence tonight. The bell tolls again, fainter this time as if the wind turned its face, and you catch a small miracle. The sergeant shifts mouth closes, and for several heartbeats, the world holds its breath. In that pocket of quiet, you feel the camp's collective shoulders drop. Someone's muttered prayer finishes its sentence. Far off a horse sneezes, then resumes chewing in that contented wet way horses have. Your own inhale lengthens. Your exhale grows heavier, soft as wool being folded. Maybe this is it. Maybe sleep waits around the next bell. You tug the cloak higher, nestle your ear into the tunic bundle, and let the edges of awareness blur like ink in water. Then, of course, the second miracle fails to arrive. The sergeant's nose remembers its mission and lets out a new species of snore less thunder, more bagpipe with a cold. You nearly laugh because the alternative is despair. Another soldier mutters, "Saints save us," and somebody else answers, "They would if we'd ask properly." That answer lands. You feel the tense mood tilt from irritated to introspective, from elbows to invocations. You realize that after noise, after jokes, after negotiations with physics soldiers have always reached for the same final bedtime tool. Prayer murmured, braided with habit, sometimes spoken for quiet as much as for comfort. You roll onto your side, facing the tent wall where the canvas shows a faint wavering triangle of starlight, and you listen as words begin to stitch themselves in the dark, some formal, some homemade, some barely more than breath. It isn't silence, not exactly, but it is a softer kind of sound, one that might cradle your thoughts and set them down gently instead of juggling them. Your eyelids lower a fraction. A bell sighs from the village round and far. The sergeant snores, but his music now seems folded into a larger hum, a human hum as if the camp itself were a single chest rising and falling. And just as your breathing finds that warm river it's been searching for all night, you hear the almost secret shuffle of a fellow soldier settling to his knees, the faint clink of a charm or a token, the whisper of lips forming words to no one and everyone at once. Because the next refuge for sleep isn't cloth or straw or clever geometry, it's the prayers before sleep, the ritual that might hush even a sergeant's thunder inside your skull. You've tried mud, you've tried watch duty, you've even tried negotiating with the sergeant's nasal orchestra. But when soldiers finally crawled towards sleep, many still leaned on a final ritual before surrendering their eyes, prayers before sleep. Whether whispered to a saint murmured toward a small icon, or muttered half-consciously into a blanket, the act itself carried weight. Like tucking yourself not just into straw, but into hope. You exhausted and itchy tug your cloak tighter and listen as words ripple through the camp in uneven waves. Some voices tremble with sincerity, others trail into snores mid-sentence. Yet together they form a chorus softer than any trumpet or drum, the quiet language of men trying to anchor themselves against fear. Mainstream historical fact prayer at bedtime was a near-universal soldier habit in the pre-modern world. Medieval chronicles describe knights reciting the Pater Noster, or fragments of psalms before stretching out on pallets. Crusaders carried small rosaries, sometimes carved from olive wood, worn smooth by repetition. In the 30 Years' War, chaplains walked through tents in the evening, offering blessings as men curled beneath damp cloaks. Even in armies less overtly religious, soldiers invented nighttime invocations. Romans muttered charms to Mars or Fortuna, seeking protection for themselves and insomnia for their enemies. In the American Civil War, pocket Bibles were so common that some soldiers literally rested their heads on them like makeshift pillows imbued with divine insurance. Quirky tidbit, not all prayers were solemn. Some were downright practical requests for dry boots, fewer fleas, or a mercifully short watch. Letters from Napoleonic soldiers record jokes about praying for snorers to stop or be stopped. One medieval soldier supposedly prayed each night that his commander would forget the next morning's drills. A modern historian notes wryly that the prayer was never answered. Soldiers also carried talismans that blurred the line between faith and superstition, charms against nightmares, knots tied in cords, small relics stitched into coats. To whisper over these objects before bed was as common as fluffing a pillow today. Historians still argue whether prayer was primarily about faith or function. Was it sincere devotion, a cultural reflex, or simply a tool to manage stress? Some scholars argue soldiers clung to ritual because it restored a sense of order in chaos. If the day was dictated by trumpets and sergeants, the night at least could belong to God or luck or something larger than mud. Others suggest fatigue blurred belief and ritual until the two became indistinguishable. Did you pray because you were devout, or because your neighbour's whisper lulled you into joining sources disagree? What is clear is that armies rarely banned prayer even in secularizing centuries because commanders recognized it calmed men, even if heaven didn't intervene. Imagine a tent heavy with damp wool and tired bodies but threaded with soft murmurings. Protect my mother, guide my feet, let me dream of home. You catch fragments like passing fireflies, each glowing briefly before fading. The bell motif returns slow tolls from a monastery somewhere beyond the ridge, reminding everyone of the larger world that still keeps time. The bell becomes a partner to the prayers, as though the night itself were nodding along. You close your eyes, not praying loudly, but letting your thoughts drift in the same current. You picture your family, your town, maybe the warm light of a hearth you haven't seen in months. The words are simple, barely formed, but the act is soothing. Even your body responds, tension draining from shoulders, breathing syncing with the rhythm of whispers. For the first time in days, the camp feels less like a gathering of strangers and more like a fragile household, hundreds of men chasing one small candle of safety together. A joke sneaks in even here. Someone mutters, "Pray hard, we're due stew tomorrow and I'd like it thicker than soup." Laughter follows, muffled but real, and the tension breaks. Soldiers have always found ways to laugh on the edge of fear, as though humour itself were a kind of hymn. You smile, then let it dissolve, because smiling requires muscles, and you've already promised them rest. Scholars sometimes note the psychological link. Prayer might not change the outcome of tomorrow's skirmish, but it changed the inner weather of tonight's sleeper. By speaking to the unseen men, reminded themselves they weren't entirely alone, even when surrounded by enemies' storms or the echo of their own doubt. Ritual, whether sacred or superstitious, created a boundary line between the noise of the day and the fragile hope of night. The prayers fade. One voice lingers low and steady until even it blurs into a snore. You listen for a while longer because silence in a camp never lasts. The bell tolls again. You exhale, finally convinced you might slide into real rest. Your hand curls under your chin, the wool scratchy but familiar. You imagine warmth, not walls, light, not shadows. And just as your dreams begin to unfurl, wool soft, bell steady, almost safe, a drop of cold water slides off the tent seam straight onto your forehead. You gasp, curse softly, and hear muffled laughter from someone still awake. The rain is back, reminding you that no ritual keeps the weather at bay. You sigh, tug your cloak higher, and resign yourself. Tonight's prayer may have been answered, but tomorrow's sleep is already negotiating. Because soon the rain will soak your boots, the river will rise, and soldiers will discover what it means to go to bed with chilly river crossings still clinging to their bones. Cold lives in water, the way smoke lives in fire, completely possessively without any plan to share. You wade the ford at dusk because the road demands it, and the river greets you the way rivers greet soldiers in every century with polite indifference. It slides around your calves and then with a sly shrug climbs to your knees. Your breath hitchhikes up your throat. Your fingers learn new definitions of numb. Your boots take in a little more of the world than they should. By the time you reach the opposite bank, the sun is a coin spent on the horizon, and the night breeze files its report directly to your wet socks. You think of bed such as it is a bedroll on dirt, and realise you'll be carrying this river into sleep like a souvenir you can't return. Mainstream historical fact, armies have always been hostage to water. Romans preferred to bridge when they could, laying pontoon spans or even throwing together timber footbridges with astonishing speed. Caesar bragged about it, and frankly he earned the brag. When bridges weren't possible, They forded men in Calagay openwork military sandals whose drainage was excellent, but whose insulation was a bad joke in cold seasons. Medieval hosts sought shallow fords marked by locals, sometimes stretching ropes across to guide men and carts in the dark. Where rivers ran, stubborn commanders sent the stoutest swimmers first with lines. Early modern and Napoleonic armies used pontonniers as a specialised arm, yet diaries still groan about nights spent sopping after a late crossing. By the 19th century, soldiers learned to rub tallow or grease into leather to resist water. In the American Civil War, men prized gum blankets and extra socks like small miracles. In the mud wars of the 20th century, trenchfoot etched its name into medical reports, cold, wet and pressure conspiring to make numbness a slow enemy. Across eras, the order of operations remained grimly familiar: cross, shiver, ring, hope. Quirky tidbit, the folk engineering of the soldier's foot could fill a small museum. Men stuffed clean straw or hay into boots as disposable insulation. They rotated socks under their shirts to body dry while wearing the other pair. They warmed river stones by the fire and slipped them wrapped to the toes, primitive hot water bottles that occasionally scorched both dignity and wool. Medieval accounts mention wooden pattens overshoes that kept soles out of muck in camp, click-clacking like a percussion section you didn't ask for. Step riders greased felt boots with animal fat. Some sailors turned soldiers swore by salt rubs on feet to harden them, a cure that mainly hardened everyone else's patience. And then there's the eternal question: sleep with boots on to keep them from freezing solid, or off to let them dry. Either way, someone in the morning will be hopping on one foot negotiating with leather like it's a landlord. Historians still argue the balance between discipline and physiology in these watery miseries. Was it wiser tactically to forbid campfires after a late crossing, avoiding enemy eyes at the cost of frozen men, or to risk a discreet glow so boots and spirits could thaw? Did commanders who mandated boots on at night in hostile country save lives through readiness, or lose them by inviting foot rot and cramping that hampered the line next day? Sources split. Some campaigns glow with reports of strict silent nights and grim endurance. Others show pragmatic officers allowing small shielded fires and strict sock rotations as policy. Medical treatises from the 18th and 19th centuries wag fingers at night air and damp. Modern analyses reassign blame to duration of exposure, poor drainage and shoes designed more for marching than for metabolism. Feet are furnaces and wet leather is a tax collector. Back in your body, the river keeps talking even after you leave it. Its low murmur haunts the camp's edge, sliding past reeds and stones, syllables of water repeating a story only frogs understand. The sound is not cruel exactly. It's just indifferent. You set down your kit, peel off socks that could now plausibly be used as small aquaria, and rub your feet until they remember they're attached to a living person. Someone nearby smacks boots together to knock mud free. Another holds soles up to the fire like they're toasting bread. Steam rises, not dramatic, just visible, a small plume that says heat is returning. Your skin tingles 1,000 pins and you decide pins are better than nothing. Practical dance, learned from men who learned it from other men. Ring socks, twist again. Nest them under your shirt at the stomach, so body heat can work the quiet miracle. Set boots near, but not too near the coals, because leather shrinks faster than patience. Massage the spaces between toes, because the spaces are where cold keeps secrets. If you have spare rags, wrap them loosely to pull moisture outward, a capillary action on a soldier's budget. Shift your weight. Rotate ankles, wage diplomacy with tendons. The river will try to stow away in your bones. Your job is to evict it before night does you in. Joke quota gently honoured. On the bright side, someone says we crossed fast enough to beat the fish. Another adds, a fish beat me, it took my sock. Laughter lifts like steam, brief and bright. Humour is circulation for the mind. It gets blood moving where orders cannot. You chuckle and then wince as a nettle of feeling returns to a heel you'd temporarily donated to the river god. If the crossing was late, and they often are, sleep becomes a timed experiment. How much warmth can you regain before the watch rotation drags you out again? You build a nest with whatever dry you can scavenge. Spare shirt under hips, ground cloth angled to discourage nocturnal tributaries, blanket layered to trap rising heat. You'd like to believe you'll be fine by morning. Your toes auditioning for icicle rolls disagree. In some units, men bunk 2 and 2, sharing heat by proximity, with a minimum of elbows and shame. In others, a strict no crowding keeps order, even if it can't keep sensation in your smallest digits. Academic footnote: you can feel letters from winter campaigns argue for discipline of the foot as fiercely as for drill. Change socks at prescribed times. Powder with whatever absorbent is to hand oat flour ash later talc. Never sleep in the pair you wore through water. Keep laces loose at night so morning swelling doesn't trap you in your own boots. Some scholars suggest units that formalize these habits bled less strength to fatigue. Others caution survivorship bias. Perhaps the men who wrote the advice were precisely the ones whose feet carried them far enough to write. The debate ambles on in sensible shoes. River night has texture. The reeds hiss when wind fingers them. A duck mutters once and then thinks better of it. From the bank a low clink of pebbles as current jostles them, a minimal percussion section that will not stop when you wish it would. The ground near the water hoards damp like a miser. You scoot your bedroll a yard up slope and discover the mercy of elevation measured in inches. Your cloak warms by degrees like a reluctant stove. You flex toes again, less pain, more promise. Your breath makes small clouds and then smaller ones. The world edges toward bearable. Then the second wave of trouble arrives quiet as a rumour boots that won't wake. A neighbour shakes his shoe and finds a new rigid shape leather having stiffened into an opinion overnight. He swears softly a thread pulled halfway through the needle of air. Another tries to tug on a damp sock and gets 2 toes in before discovering that cold can invent new curse words. You help where you can, hands on heel, gentle twist-shared heat from palms. The camaraderie of stupid situations is older than any banner. One last practicality before dreams some veterans swear by sleeping with feet. Slightly elevated, a folded pack under calves to ease throbbing and tempt blood back to the core. Others prefer knees, curled fetal guarding warmth like a candle in wind. You try the pack trick and find your heartbeat less loud in your toes, an improvement with no paperwork. The river's voice dulls. The reeds stop gossiping. Even the stones seem to lie still. The cold is not gone, but it's manageable. And manageable is a soldier's favourite adjective. You begin to drift, moving along that narrow bridge between shiver and surrender, when wind decides to change key. It comes down the channel, picks up a wet edge, and slides it under the tent flap with the curiosity of a cat. The embers near you hiccup into new flame, shadows lean across faces, someone curses, someone laughs, someone snores in a way that suggests they've made peace with the aquatic part of tonight's curriculum. You close your eyes again and give the river back its name. Water. Not enemy, not friend. Just the world doing world things. Tomorrow's march will start with boots that remember too much and knees that forgot how to be joints. But now warmth gathers in your arch, then your heel, then the soft spaces between. You let the murmuring water become a lullaby, slow and repeating the original metronome of the planet. Breath in, breath out, current in, current out. Whatever else happens, you crossed. You're here. You owe the river nothing further tonight. And just as sleep finally loosens its reservations and steps toward you, a thread of sound floats up from the dim fire, low at first, then steadier. A voice, then 2, then 3, weaving a melody that moves the way water moves, but warmer songs around the fire, the ancient answer to teeth chatter and long roads. You smile in the dark because the best blanket in any army is a song you all remember. The song begins like smoke drifting, curling half there until suddenly it's everywhere. One voice cracked but steady tests a tune that may have been old when the singer's grandfather learned it. Then another joins and another until the circle of fire becomes a choir of sorts, off-key, off-beat but strangely perfect. You lean back against your pack-wet cloak, steaming faintly in the glow, and realise that this more than tents or cloaks or straw is how soldiers coax themselves into sleep songs around the fire, woven from memory, sorrow, and just enough humour to keep the night from winning. Mainstream historical fact music in camp has been recorded as long as there have been armies. Roman legions carried cornicines and tubicines for signals, but in the evening soldiers sang folk airs, marching chants reworked into softer cadences. Medieval chronicles note knights and squires singing psalms while common soldiers favoured ballads of love and drink. During the 100 Years' War, English longbowmen were said to hum country tunes before battles, easing fear through rhythm. In the 30 Years' War, Lutheran hymns floated across smoky camps. In Catholic armies, Marian songs did the same. Napoleonic memoirs remember chansons sung by French troops, often parodies of village tunes, while British regiments carried Johnny Cope and other mocking verses to every bivouac. By the 19th and 20th centuries, soldiers' songs had become almost a genre of their own, marching in daylight, softening into lullabies at night. Quirky tidbit soldiers were unrepentant lyric thieves. A love ballad from home became a parody about rations. A hymn warped into a complaint about officers. In the Crimean War, British troops rewrote operatic arias into comic verses about lice. In the American Civil War arena, a sentimental love song became so popular in camp that officers worried it made men too homesick, too sad, too ready to desert. And yet the same tune sung softly around a fire might carry men into the only restful sleep of the week. One diary recalls a sergeant who could silence fleas just by singing Shenandoah, a compliment surely exaggerated but still echoing the truth that music distracted from misery better than silence. Historians still argue whether these songs built cohesion or simply distracted individuals. Some scholars claim communal singing forged esprit de corps, a bond stronger than drill. Others suggest the practice was more personal, a way for each man to remind himself of home even if others sang beside him. Was the campfire chorus an army tradition, or 1,000 private lullabies sung in unison? Records show both officers encouraged chorals, chaplains led hymns, yet most men gravitated to tunes of their own, creating a soundscape both collective and deeply solitary. The sound motif tonight is unmistakable. Crackle of pine logs, hiss of wet bark, and over it the rising fall of voices, low, rough, familiar. Some men hum instead of singing, others whistle, lips pursed like they're kissing the night. The rhythm is slow, drawn out as if every verse must stretch long enough to carry everyone a little closer to rest. The fire itself participates, snapping on the downbeat sparks, spiraling upward like stray notes searching for a constellation. You close your eyes and let the chorus wrap around you, a wool blanket for the ears. Lyrics blur with sleep. Someone sings of a tavern that probably never existed where ale was cheap and friends immortal. Someone else croons of a woman named Anna or Maria, or perhaps just my love the name shifting with the accent. A joke verse slips in, mocking the cook's soup, or the sergeant's snore, or the endless march, and laughter ripples before fading back into melody. This alternation of solemn and silly is its own kind of rhythm. Remind yourself of sorrow. Lighten it with humour, then sing again. A joke forms in your own head. If campfire songs were judged by modern standards, half would be lawsuits for plagiarism, and the other half therapy sessions put to music. You chuckle softly, not to disturb, but because fatigue itself makes everything funny. The man beside you mistakes your laugh for agreement with the verse, and leans closer, singing louder, his cracked voice a stubborn declaration against the night's chill. The scholarly debates filter back into memory even here. Some argue soldiers slept better after singing, others say the stimulation made them restless hearts, still beating to the rhythm long after the fire dimmed. Diaries support both views. One man writes, "I slept at once after our song another. I lay awake with the tune in my head till cockcrow." Perhaps it depended on the song, or the soldier, or the silence that followed. Gradually voices taper. One by one men peel away, sliding into cloaks, heads sinking towards saddlebags. The last singer drags a verse longer than the fire deserves, his voice fading as embers dim. Finally only humming remains softer than the wind, and then even that gives up. The fire collapses in on itself, a red sigh in the ashes. The night reclaims its dominance, but it has been blunted at least for an hour by music. You lie back, ears still echoing with scraps of melody. For a moment you could almost believe you're home, not here. You almost sleep, and then the truth sneaks back. Comfort is temporary, songs fade, and the fire's warmth dies faster than you want it to. Sleep, when it comes, arrives with company you never invited, fleas, lice, and all the crawling guests who consider soldiers' bodies their banquet. Because the next challenge of a soldierly slumber is not the trumpet, nor the mud, nor the sergeant's thunderous snore, but the fleas and crawling company that claim the night as their battlefield. It starts as a prickle, a suggestion that your skin has opinions. Then the suggestion hires a drumline. You shift on the straw shifts back, and suddenly you are a bustling metropolis, and the citizens have grievances. Welcome to the night's most democratic enemy, fleas, and all the crawling company that file no paperwork and pay rent in bites. You pull your cloak tighter because warmth is non-negotiable, but warmth is also the grand opening sign for every insect within 3 counties. Even the straw whispers. It crackles with the secret lives of things that thrive when soldiers stop moving. Mainstream historical fact, vermin were not an occasional nuisance. They were a structural feature of pre-modern soldiering. Medieval accounts lament pulex et pediculus, fleas and lice, as inevitable campmates. Straw pallets rarely changed, became thriving little economies of jumpers and crawlers. Early modern quartermasters issued fresh straw only when they could, which often meant not often. In siege conditions, soldiers recycled bedding until it looked like compost with ambitions. Napoleonic memoirs complain of armies of puces, while Crimean war letters home devote entire paragraphs to lice. Even in the 19th and early 20th centuries, when sanitation manuals multiplied field conditions still made the body a hotel, you don't have fleas, you host them. Quirky tidbit soldiers developed a whole folk zoology to fight the itch. Some swore that sleeping with garlic cloves in a pouch at the neck convinced fleas you were unappetizing. Others kept a sprig of wormwood under the blanket for the same reason it made you smell like an herb shop that lost an argument. There's the famous shirt-boiling ritual strip: down-stew your linen in a kettle. Watch the surface froth with the defeated. But fuel is precious, and dignity is limited at 2 a.m. Another trick: seam scorching, running a heated knife blade along trouser seams, where lice lay eggs, a firefight at the microscopic front. In some campaigns, men dusted themselves with wood ash as dry shampoo and insect discouragement, turning the tent into a snow globe every time someone sneezed. You've never seen such inventive science conducted with such questionable peer review. Historians still argue how much parasites affected combat effectiveness versus morale. Some scholars insist the toll was profound. Constant itching wrecks, sleep loss wrecks, alertness, and a tired army makes sloppy choices. Others note that letters often treat vermin with gallows, humour suggesting soldiers normalised the misery and carried on. On the medical side, debate persists over Vector's lice-spread trench fever in later wars. Earlier centuries bundled many fevers under vague names that make modern diagnosis a guessing game. Did fleas in medieval camps significantly move disease, or were water waste and cramped quarters the real culprits? Sources scratch around the answer without pinning it down appropriately enough. Back to your skins committee meeting. The sound motif tonight is small straw rustle fabric. Whisper the faintest tick-tick of a beetle auditioning for percussion. Outside wind rehearses in the guy lines, but inside the orchestra is intimate and rude. You practice the oldest martial art: don't scratch, because scratching makes everything louder, and blood is an RSVP you'd rather not send. You try the cloak tuck, trapping cuffs tight to wrists, so nothing can parade up your sleeves. You cinch trouser cuffs like you're gift wrapping your ankles. You imagine yourself hermetically sealed, then remember your collar, your waistband, your socks, your entire existence. The flea laughs in 30-second notes. Joke 1 floated like a paper boat on a flood. At least someone's eating well tonight. It earns a sleep-drunk snort from the bedroll to your left. Joke 2 even softer. If the quartermaster won't issue fresh straw, perhaps he'll issue the fleas uniform so we can put them on parade. The snort becomes a laugh smothered by a blanket. Humour is the soldier's topical cream doesn't cure the condition, but takes the sting out of the symptoms. You resort to inspection by starlight. The moon through the tent seam gifts you just enough glow to wage tiny war. Lift 'em tap seam flick with thumbnail whisper, apologies to your dignity. A veteran once taught you the pinch and snap pinch fabric so the seam bulges, snap it, so eggs lose their grip. Another trick is geography: push straw into a moat ring around your bedroll, a no man's land that doesn't stop invaders so much as slow them long enough for you to fall asleep first. A few scatter salt, a few swear by vinegar, a few swear at vinegar. There is unexpectedly a rhythm to the itch. Heat rises under the cloak, the fleas throw a festival, and then if you hold still with monk-like stubbornness, your sweat cools and the party loses steam. That's the secret the old hands teach: stillness is a weapon. The fewer wild thrashes, the fewer new invitations for explorers seeking fresh terrain. You make yourself into a slow hill. You let your breath go on being a tide. You do not flinch when one ambitious pioneer abseils from collar to chest. You make a deal if morning finds them, morning can judge them. For now you're a monastery of flesh practicing silence. Scholarship peeks in again because you can't help it. Some officers tried real policy, issuing periodic straw changes, mandating shirt-washing parades. Imagine a line of men slapping wet linen against stones like a Gregorian chant for laundry. Ordering campsites rotated to avoid foul ground. Others pressed for fumigation, hanging clothes over pits filled with burning charcoal and sulphur. Effective, also a tad apocalyptic. Not all measures travelled well. In winter, water is a rumour. In sieges, fuel a fantasy. In forced marches, time, a luxury only maps enjoy. So the army's sanitation ideal met the road's calendar and lost again and again. You ease into micro-meditation. Name 5 sensations that aren't itch the cloak scratch that is not bite. The straw's cool where sweat hasn't reached. The dull ache near your hip bone from last night's pebble. The lingering smoke smell woven into wool. The soft weight of your own hand when it commits to staying still. Your nervous system takes the hint and lowers its voice. The flea orchestra keeps playing, but you've moved to a balcony seat with heavy curtains. There's the philosophical portion of the night roomy as a great hall. What is a soldier if not a person who learns to coexist with the unconquerable? Rain-cold noise, insects each a tiny empire. Your victories are local and temporary, which is the only kind any human gets. You grin unexpectedly peaceful because the thought is too big for fleas to bite. You remember a camp rumour a captain once paid a penny bounty for each squashed louse, and his company showed up with neat piles that doubled his payroll. Investigation revealed a thriving breeding program behind a tent, soldiers industriously raising lice to cash in. The bounty ended, the lice did not. Whether the tale is true hardly matters. Soldiers tell it because it feels true about incentives, about ingenuity, about the way problems multiply when you feed them. Outside, a wind change slides along the ground like a careful hand smoothing a sheet. The tent wall lifts a fraction, breathes cool into the crowded space, and every living thing recalculates you the fleas, the sleep you keep trying to befriend. The man to your right mutters a curse, then adds almost kindly, "They hate tobacco. You do not smoke, but you borrow the idea. Hate the taste you're offering. You rub a little soap along the wrist pulse, that precious sliver saved for real emergencies. Apparently sanity qualifies. The scent is faint, home-like persuasive. Whether it deters any insect is unknown. It deters despair by smelling like not war. The scholarly debate closes with humility. How much of what we read jokes about louse warfare heroic laundry sessions was coping mechanism polished for the page? Did soldiers glamorize their squalor after the fact or understate it to keep families from worry? Diaries differ. One scribe rhapsodizes about a louse-free night as if he'd met the Virgin Mary. Another references bites only in passing beside wine shortages and a lost boot. In the fog between texts, one truth stands: sleep, and parasites negotiate every evening and the terms decide tomorrow's temper. Your eyelids begin to tilt grain by grain. The itch hasn't vanished, it has receded to the borderlands. Your breath grows long, your jaw unclenches. Someone snores, but softly, a kettle purring rather than a forge roaring. A mouse rustles at the edge of the straw moat, so much for that, and you let it practice its cardio. You have a more urgent appointment, you and oblivion finally shaking hands. And then, because knights are playwrights who love an entrance, there's a new sound, papery and bright in the darkness, a letter being unfolded. A hush follows that sound, like reverence follows the first note of a hymn. The man across from you clears his throat, whispers, from home, and begins to read voice-breaking on the edges of words about weather harvest, and somebody's small triumph spelled out in uneven lines. Every tent becomes a listening cup. The fleas forget you. You forget the fleas. Only sentences move now, crossing more ground than any army. Because next comes the letters from home, the one medicine that could make even a scratchy night feel gentle, and the one lullaby ink can sing. The paper unfolds with a sigh, fragile and eager at once. You almost feel the fibres lean toward you, as if the ink itself wants to leap back into a human voice. Letters from home, the one thing in a soldier's world that could make a tent feel like a room, a fire feel like a hearth, and a bedroll on mud feel briefly like a feather mattress. The man across the way holds his candle stub low, shielding the flame with his palm so the words glow against his knuckles. His lips move, shaping syllables written hundreds of miles away, and everyone within earshot becomes an audience to both a private and public performance. Mainstream historical fact letters were lifelines in nearly every army that could sustain a postal route. Roman legions left tablets and papyrus scraps, notes from wives or comrades, sometimes stored in military archives by accident, showing us today that requests for socks are eternal. Medieval knights carried messages sealed with wax and family crests. Common soldiers relied on scribes or literate companions to pen short, simple lines. By the 18th century, postal systems shadowed armies across Europe with couriers braving bandits and weather to deliver thin bundles of folded paper. The American Civil War generated an estimated 10 million letters. so many that some regiments joked their wagons carried more ink than bullets. In World War I, entire censorship offices churned through piles of correspondence, cutting out secrets, but letting love, longing, and gossip pass through. Across all eras, letters became the most tangible connection between battlefield mud and domestic routine. Quirky tidbit soldiers often read letters aloud, even when personal, because sharing words was sharing comfort. A note about weather in Normandy or harvest in Virginia suddenly belonged to everyone in the tent. Some letters became communal property, copied, sung, or turned into camp jokes. A single missive describing a cow that refused to give milk might circulate as a running gag for weeks. In Napoleonic camps, illiterate men sometimes paid comrades in rations to read and reread their letters nightly, treating the voice of home like a lullaby on loop. One medieval anecdote tells of a soldier so proud of receiving a rare letter that he pinned it above his bedroll like a talisman, even though he couldn't read a word of it. He slept beneath it anyway, convinced the parchment itself carried blessing. Historians still argue about the reliability of these letters as sources. Were they accurate reflections of life at home or carefully curated illusions to keep soldiers calm? Some scholars argue families softened the truth, downplaying hardships, omitting deaths, exaggerating good harvests to keep morale intact. Others counter that the rawness of many surviving letters suggests otherwise blunt news of sickness, debt, or betrayal that surely did not soothe the reader. Another debate: did letters increase homesickness, or did they soothe it? Evidence points both ways. Some soldiers wrote of being revived by the touch of words from home, while others admitted that a letter could make the absence worse, turning longing into a physical ache. Back in your body, you feel the quiet power of the moment. Around you, the tent hushes, fleas forgotten, snores suspended. Men lean toward the voice as if it's a fire itself. You hear of a wife's health, a child's first steps, a brother's new ox, the gossip of a village tavern where nobody realizes their boy is reading these words by candlestub hundreds of miles away. The ordinary becomes extraordinary by distance. A mention of fresh bread makes stomachs growl and hearts ache in equal measure. A description of spring blossoms feels surreal when you're wrapped in mud and smoke. The sound motif here is paper and voice, the soft crackle of unfolded pages, the hush of sentences. Outside, the wind has slowed as if listening too. The bell from a far church tower hums, once then stops. The words continue, "We are well. We pray for you. The harvest is fair. You don't know the family, but the sentences rock you like waves anyway. Home by proxy is still home." A joke slips in because soldiers can't help it. The reader falters on a word, squints and improvises. She says the pig is fat enough to roast. The men laugh. Someone calls, "Save us a leg." The reader grins, then corrects himself. "No, sorry, it says the baby is fat enough to walk." The laughter doubles now at the error, but underneath the mirth lies envy. Even mistakes from home are treasures. You think about your own imagined letter. Maybe it would talk about weather, about bread, about a field planted and harvested without you. Maybe it would be short 5 lines, no flourishes, but those 5 lines would weigh more than all the weapons in camp. You picture setting it under your head, letting the ink bleed into dreams. Sleep through paper, that's the real luxury soldiers crave. Scholarly aside again, military post was inconsistent. Sometimes letters arrived weeks or months late, bunched in bundles that overwhelmed the recipient with joy or grief all at once. Other times, they never arrived. Archaeologists find unopened packets in old camps, undelivered and unsent, proving that absence wasn't always the family's silence, but the system's collapse. Some soldiers wrote anyway, storing their own letters in satchels like bottled messages, comforted by the act, even if the recipient never read them. Writing became as much a ritual as reading another way to fold the day into something survivable. The letter ends. The man folds it carefully, places it against his chest and exhales as if lighter. Around you, bodies shift. Blankets rustle, sighs deepen. The camp exhales too. For a moment everyone is softened, wrapped not in wool but in the imagined embrace of people far away. You feel your own eyelids lower, warmed by a fire that is not here but is still real. And then as sleep nearly claims you, another soldier stirs, reaching for his saddlebag. He pulls it close, props it under his head, and mutters something about a better pillow than stone. The rustle of leather, the creak of straps, another nightly improvisation. You smile, knowing the next lesson of soldier sleep is less sentimental and more practical pillows of saddlebags comfort crafted out of necessity and horse gear. A pillow is not a pillow. It's whatever you can convince your neck to believe. Tonight it's a saddlebag lumpy with straps and buckles faintly perfumed with horse sweat, and yet compared to bare stone or mud, it's practically a featherbed. You watch the soldier across from you wrestle with his flipping it once then twice, before finally settling with the curved edge wedged beneath his skull. He exhales a little puff of satisfaction, as if he's cracked the code to luxury. You follow suit, sliding your own pack under your head, feeling the uneven bulges press into your scalp. Somehow, even discomfort becomes comfort when you choose it. Mainstream historical fact: across centuries, soldiers used gear as pillows. Roman legionaries often rested their heads on their loculus, a leather satchel stuffed with rations and kit, or on the bundle of cloak and shield stacked together. Medieval troops favoured saddlebags because cavalry gear was always present, stuffed with tack grain for horses, or whatever loot hadn't spoiled yet. Early modern soldiers leaned on knapsacks crammed with shirts, cartridges, and sometimes food that leaked just enough to season their dreams. By the Napoleonic Wars, memoirs describe men wrapping coats around their packs to soften the blow. Civil War soldiers often wrote of saddlebags and haversacks, doubled as pillows, half storage, half comfort, fully inadequate. It was universal wherever armies marched. The first question at night was, "What will I put under my head?" Quirky tidbit saddlebag pillows were more than comfort, they were security. A soldier's bag held rations, pay letters, or precious keepsakes, and thieves existed in every camp. Sleeping literally on your possessions was both alarm system and insurance. Diaries mention men waking mid-snore to a tug at their pillow fists already flying. Some added noisy objects, a tin cup, a chain, so that any thief tugging at the bag risked waking the whole tent. Others used saddles themselves, turned upside down, which cradled the neck in stiff leather and left an imprint you'd feel for 3 days. More humorous were the men who used helmets as headrests, a steel bowl that made you dream of anvils. Yet by morning they still praised the invention because imagination is a soldier's most useful bedding. Historians still argue whether these improvised pillows helped or harmed rest. Some claim familiarity with one's gear offered psychological ease, better a lumpy known quantity than empty ground. Others argue that hard packs and saddles only stiffen necks, leaving armies sore and sluggish. The debate reflects a broader question. Was soldier sleep functional or restorative? Did men wake enough to fight, or did chronic stiffness and half-rested bodies degrade performance? Evidence is mixed. One Napoleonic officer swore his men slept soundly with knapsacks for bolsters, while a Civil War private confessed that his bag was the cruelest pillow pressing dreams out of skull into dirt. The truth, as usual, lives in both sentences. Now back to the camp. You settle on your saddlebag, shifting until the buckle rests against a less bony patch of skull. It's not comfortable exactly, but it's familiar, and that is its own form of comfort. Your cheek picks up the faint smell of leather rubbed with tallow of oats long since spilled of dust from roads walked too far. Oddly, the scents are grounding. They remind you that tomorrow exists because tomorrow you'll strap this same bag back to your horse or shoulder. Sleep thrives in routine as much as in softness. The sound motif here is leather, and breath straps creak as men adjust buckles, clink against stone size release as bodies stop fidgeting. Outside, the wind has slowed. Only a horse stamps occasionally jingling tack like a lullaby written for cavalry. Somewhere a nightjar trills its call, thin but steady. Inside the tent the noise quiets, each man curled around his pack like it's a cradle and a vault at once. And then predictably humour intrudes. One soldier mutters, "Best pillow I've owned. Horse should be jealous." Another adds, "My horse is jealous. I stole back his oats for stuffing." A ripple of laughter moves through the half-asleep crowd. These aren't jokes for roaring, they're whispers to stitch the seam between waking and sleep. You smile into your own bag cheek pressed to a buckle that digs like an ungentle masseur. Practical adjustments keep coming, cloak folded once more under the neck. Boots tucked beneath bag to elevate the head a fraction. Blanket edge pulled over face to block the draft. The choreography is precise, each movement rehearsed nightly. Each soldier a tired dancer in a play called Surviving Until Morning. Eventually stillness wins. Scholarly notes echo faintly in your drifting brain. Archaeologists find worn leather straps with unusual polish, perhaps from heads resting nightly on the same spot. Campaign letters mention stiffness in the nape, dismissed as ordinary as dust. Some historians suggest that constant neck strain compounded fatigue shaping armies that always fought half sore, half rested, wholly resigned. Others argue the human body is adaptable, that men trained by necessity slept well enough, even on iron helmets and wooden saddles. Maybe both are true. Maybe the point is not the quality of rest, but the persistence of seeking it. You let the bag shape itself to your skull. You let your skull agree. The leather warms, the straw hushes, the air folds in. You're not in a bed, not in a home, not in safety, but you are horizontal, you are still, and you are almost gone. Until the walls themselves speak. Not cloth walls, not tent canvas, but the looming stone walls outside trembling faintly with distant thunder. Not weather, no siege engines. You hear a deep shudder, a crack like the world's knuckle popping, and realise tomorrow may not offer walls at all. Tonight's pillow is a saddlebag. Tomorrow's may be nothing but earth and rubble. Because the next trial of soldier sleep is not in campfires or tents, but under siege nightmares when the very stones above you rattle and dream themselves into dust. Stone dreams loudly during a siege. You lie there with your head on a saddlebag that has already confessed every buckle to your skull, and the wall beside you trembles as if it's trying to remember how to be a hill again. The floor hums low, steady a bass note carried up from the ground by engines that move like patient monsters. You taste grit at the back of your throat, the air powdered with lime and dust, and every breath feels like you're sipping the castle through a straw. Sleep doesn't just hide, it evacuates. You tell yourself the vibration is distant. The vibration politely disagrees. Mainstream historical fact, sieges redefined nights. Medieval and early modern besiegers brought trebuchets and mangonels to lob stones and firepots. Later cannon took the job with louder opinions. Inside the walls, garrisons slept in armour, or with boots half-laced near alarm bells and muster points, because a breach could arrive between one blink and the next. Watch schedules doubled. Sally ports opened for sudden sorties. Carpenters and masons became night shift heroes, shoring up cracks with gabions, fascines, and hastily stuffed mattresses. Yes, mattresses sacrificed from beds to soften impacts and catch shards. In early modern sieges, defenders listened for miners. Tunnelling countermining crews pressed ears to soil with bowls or drums to catch the scrape of enemy picks. Night was not for sleep, it was for listening. Quirky tidbit people swore by the oddest anti-siege sleep aids. One chronicler writes of soldiers tucking wax plugs into their ears, pilfered from chapel candles to muffle concussions, effective until the heat made them well pliable. Another notes garrisons hanging wet tapestries against inner walls to trap dust and stray sparks, turning great halls into soggy galleries. Cats became highly valued for their vermin patrols, rewarded with kitchen scraps and improbable promotions. A French pamphleteer insists a certain fortress had a Captain Whiskers who inspected stores nightly. Perhaps satire, perhaps true. Either way, the cat was awake while you were trying not to be. And somewhere in Germany, citizens supposedly played lullaby chorales at dusk from tower organs, not to lull besiegers, but to steady their own nerves enough to attempt sleep. Historians still argue which fear gnawed more at defenders, the visible battering of walls or the invisible mining below. Diary writers fixate on different terrors. Some recount the rhythm of bombardment, predictable arcs, countable seconds, crashes you could brace for. Others shudder at the random quiet of dirt, the sudden boom from beneath the floor heaving like a rug being snapped. Military historians note that bombardment often aimed to terrorize as much as to topple. Engineers, meanwhile, admire and lament the cold logic of saps trenches and galleries inching closer in the night. Either way, sleep suffered first and most. Tonight's sound motif is stone and bell, a distant whoomp that's the trebuchet arm completing its swing, a brief hush flight, then the murr of a stone's breath, then the slap, the groan, the little patter of chips falling like hard rain on slate. After each impact, a bell somewhere answers two notes, only not alarm, yet just acknowledgement. We heard it. The bell is the city's heartbeat, slow but present. You try to let its rhythm settle into your bones to borrow calm from brass. The wall disagrees again with a shiver that rattles your teeth. You do the garrison shuffle cloak tighter, pack beneath knees, boots tucked close in case to arms chases you from horizontal to upright in a single syllable. Around you men lie in rows like spare beams, eyes closed but not fooled. Someone mutters a psalm. Someone else makes a joke too soft to quote, and that somehow helps a little candle of normal in a stone storm. You fish a kerchief from your pocket and tie it over your mouth, a dust mask avant la lettre, and the air becomes less bitey. You promise yourself you will not cough because coughing starts chain reactions in echoing rooms, and the last thing you need is a chorus. Practicalities have their midnight parade. The engineers chalk new cracks the instant they appear. Carpenters wedge timbers into hasty ribs. Runners ferry baskets of rubble to pour behind wounded spots, the counterintuitive logic of adding broken stone to save unbroken stone. In the courtyard, barrels of filled lids ready fire is a siege's favourite cousin. Near the gate, a heap of fascines brush bundles wait to be dragged into fresh holes. A sergeant checks the murder holes above the entry, pleasantly named ports now stuffed with rock, sand, and the possibility of boiling liquid if things get impolite. You review your own tiny checklist sword within arm's reach. Canteen cork loosened water is a sprint drink letters from home inside your tunic where they cannot be left behind even by panic. You smile at that last one. Romantic sure, but sensible too. Courage sometimes lives on paper. Sleep attempts a cautious approach. You try counting impacts instead of sheep. 8. Pause. 12. Pause. 3 close together like a drummer with urgent news. Between volleys, a weird piece like a theatre audience holding breath before the curtains part. Your eyelids lower by millimetres. The stone chooses that moment to exhale dust directly into your eyelashes. You blink and the tiny scrap of drowsiness scurries away like a guilty mouse. A gentle joke to yourself, 5-star accommodations. The walls rock you to sleep. You earn your own eye roll, but also a grin. Humour threads a stitch through your pulse and tightens the seam. You remember reading that in a famous siege a noblewoman supposedly asked if the cannon could be fired more rhythmically to make a more tolerable lullaby. Probably apocryphal, absolutely understandable. A runner bursts in, and no, not a burst exactly, because burst is a luxury reserved for daylight and safety slips in low voice to pass the word down the line, stand to at first light work parties to the outer face. Miners reported close in the south ditch. He moves on. You feel men around you tilt their attention like sunflowers. First light is hours away. Between now and then, your job is to steal whatever minutes you can from the siege's accounting department. You close your eyes again and borrow the bell's tempo. Inhale on the far clang. Exhale on the echo that follows. The vibrations shrink not because they are smaller, but because your world has narrowed to breath lengths to the geography between tongue and teeth. Dust settles in slow snow. Somewhere above, a watchman paces his boot heels a metronome. Somewhere below, a miner taps his rhythm another language entirely. Your chest rises, your chest falls. You might improbably be drifting. Then the ground whispers a sentence your bones translate before your ears, a hollow thump from beneath softer than thunder rounder than a thrown stone. The floor lifts a fraction like a sigh from a sleeping giant, then lays back down. Men sit up in one synchronized rustle. A lantern hood flips. Faces become coins. Countermine someone breathes halfway, prayer halfway lesson. The bell does not ring. This is not an alarm, not yet, but the room's air tilts toward standing, toward fastening, toward the choreography of suddenly awake. Debate briefly remembered some engineers swore by bowls of water set on floors to detect tunnelling the ripples, whispering routes and distances. Others preferred drums laid on flags, palms flat to feel the faintest tremor. Accounts disagree about success rates. Nerves agree that guessing wrong at night is the worst quiz. You glance at a bucket. Its surface quivers once, twice, then calms. A veteran nods. Not under us, he says like a bedtime story with sharp edges. Exhaustion emboldened by routine tries once more. You lay back. You turn your cheek to the cold stone, inviting it to cool your face, to siphon worry, the way it siphons the room's warmth. The saddlebag finds its old compromise with your skull. The wall hums again, but further now perhaps because your attention has chosen to stand somewhere else. You think of the letters in your tunic, of the cat with imagined rank, of tapestries dripping against proud walls, of miners tapping out their furtive morse beneath your ribs. You think of dawn, and how it always comes even to people who aren't ready for it. Your laugh tiny private returns, like working the graveyard shift, literally. You promise to retire that line, then immediately break the promise because it still works. You're almost under, truly under, when another sound enters, not stone, not bell, not miner. Voices. Not the crisp bark of orders or the mutter of prayers. Whispers braided and sibilant sliding along corridors and across straw, picking up rumours the way dust picks up light. Whispers have their own siege engines and they throw different ammunition, What-ifs, maybes, worst-case fireworks. One reaches your ear, they say the breach is near, another counters, they say relief is close. The two collide in your head like stones in a vault, because the next test of soldier sleep doesn't arrive on wheels or ropes. It arrives on tongues in the dark, where whispers in the night weigh more than cannonballs and roll longer than any stone. Whispers have sharper teeth than stones. They slip into the tent like smoke curling between straw and cloaks, and you find yourself holding your breath just to hear better, or maybe to stop hearing altogether. One soldier mutters, "They say the breach is almost ready." Another insists. No relief is coming from the west. A third swears someone saw a traitor's lantern signal from the wall. None of it is confirmed, all of it is contagious. The night, already restless, begins to feel like a giant ear pressed close to every word. You turn on your side, pulling your saddlebag pillow nearer, but the leather doesn't block sound. Whispers weigh more than blankets. Mainstream historical fact rumour was an inevitable soldierly companion. In ancient armies, word-of-mouth filled gaps where official announcements were scarce. Roman centurions sometimes had to issue daily clarifications to counter false alarms. Medieval chronicles describe garrisons buzzing with speculation how many enemies camped outside, whether supplies would last, whether a traitor lurked within. In the 30 Years' War, pamphlets and broadsheets circulated through camps, half news, half gossip, their authority no stronger than campfire whispers. By the Napoleonic era, rumour became almost institutional. Some officers deliberately spread hopeful lies to keep spirits afloat, while spies planted despairing whispers to hollow them out. In both world wars, censorship created rumour vacuums filled instantly by the chatter of men with too much time and not enough certainty. Sleep naturally was the first casualty. Quirky tidbit, some rumours were laughably absurd but still believed at 3 a.m. A medieval story claims besiegers catapulted plague corpses over the wall, true in some cases, exaggerated in most, but whispers turned every falling shadow into diseased flesh. In the American Civil War, men claimed Confederate soldiers had invisible bullets blessed by sorcery. In return, Confederates whispered that Union regiments carried demon dogs. In Napoleonic camps, rumours about entire armies defecting or emperors captured by ghosts circled the fire, until laughter mixed with fear. One French regiment even believed their enemies had trained owls to extinguish lanterns, an avian conspiracy that made more sense to tired men than simple wind. Whispers fed on exhaustion. The less you slept, the more you believed. Historians still argue whether rumour was more dangerous as psychological sabotage or as practical misinformation. Did it sap morale by gnawing away at confidence, or did it actively derail decisions, causing men to misinterpret orders? Some sources suggest commanders exploited whispers, seeding stories to manipulate troops. Others argue rumour was simply the byproduct of idle hours and anxious minds, never quite decisive but always disruptive. Letters and diaries show both one soldier admits he lost sleep fearing betrayal that never came. Another says he laughed off false alarms as bedtime stories. The debate continues, but all agree rumour shaped the nightly atmosphere of war as surely as torches and bells. Tonight's sound motif is breath itself. Whispering men breathe fast, urgent their words clipped. In the dark you hear more inhalations than sentences. Someone hisses a shh, which only sharpens curiosity. Cloaks rustle as bodies lean closer. Straw crunches under shifting weight. It feels less like a tent and more like a hive, the buzz continuous, impossible to ignore. You try to steady your own rhythm, long inhale, long exhale, pretend the whispers are wind. But words filter through regardless. They'll attack at dawn. The food is gone. The walls are hollow. Each one burrows small but persistent until your imagination is staging battles in your skull. Practical attempts at defence exist even here. Some men shove cloaks over ears, choosing fleas over rumour. Others mutter prayers louder than gossip, weaponizing piety as earplugs. A few veterans counter-whisper deliberate absurdities to dilute the poison. One insists the enemy's commander has 3 heads and a goat's tail. Laughter follows, and for a moment the rumour spell weakens. Humour again as medicine. You grin despite yourself. If lies will not stop, at least you can make them ridiculous. Scholarly aside, some garrisons even issued rules against whispering after dark, calling it disturbance of order. Officers walked rows commanding silence, yet silence rarely lasted. You can discipline mouths, you cannot discipline imaginations. Scholars point out that nighttime was the natural breeding ground for speculation. Without daylight evidence, the mind paints its own pictures. The less men slept, the more detail their whispered artwork acquired. Thus, rumour didn't just steal sleep, it recycled it into fresh fuel for tomorrow's fatigue. You roll onto your back and stare at the black tent roof, faint stars pricking through seams. For a second, you pretend the whispers are merely wind through grass, that each they say is only a reed sighing. Your eyelids lower. Maybe this trick will work. But then someone mutters close to your ear, "They'll cut throats tonight." The phrase is so specific, so intimate that your pulse leaps. You know it's probably false. You know fear is a sloppy storyteller. Yet now you're awake again, heart galloping faster than any rumour deserves. Eventually exhaustion weighs heavier than fear. The whisper's thin men doze sentences trail into snores. You find yourself caught between wake and sleep, the words still echoing like distant drums. At dawn, at dawn, at dawn. Your breathing finally slows, and the rumour becomes part of a dream twisted into nonsense where goats and emperors share a table. Sleep is one, late ragged but real. And then, just as you're drifting deep, someone stirs the embers and passes around the last of the bread, dipping crusts into watered wine. A soft murmur, "Eat." It helps. You open your eyes to see hands sharing crumbs and sips in the dark. Not feasting, not feigned luxury, just a makeshift ritual rations as nightcaps designed to lull bellies into quiet and minds into trust. Because the next lullaby isn't rumour or song or letter, it's the quiet comfort of bread and watered wine, small rations, that carried more peace than any wall could promise. Bread is heavy when it's hard light when it's shared. The crust you receive tonight is both a chipped wedge of something baked days ago, now more brick than loaf, but passed into your hand with the quiet gravity of a bedtime blessing. A comrade tips his flask, pours a thread of wine into a dented cup, and adds twice as much water. It's thin, sour, nearly a memory of drink, but as it touches the bread, softening the edges, it becomes something larger than the sum of its crumbs. You chew slowly, you swallow deliberately, and somehow, despite everything, the mud, the dust, the fleas, the whispers, you feel nearer to rest. Mainstream historical fact, soldiers in nearly every era ended their day with rations of bread and drink, often diluted wine or small beer. Roman legionaries received daily allocations of grain which they ground and baked themselves into rough loaves or porridges. In camp, wine was issued but always cut with water to prevent drunkenness and stretch supplies. Medieval garrisons lived on bread baked in castle ovens, sometimes with wine or ale, if stores permitted, but more often watered to make it last. By the 18th century, regulations codified evening issues bread and watered wine or biscuit and beer. Civil War soldiers, if lucky, got hardtack softened in coffee, the same ritual of softening brick into edible comfort. The universal rule, the last thing you put in your mouth before sleep was not a feast but a crumb, and the crumb mattered. Quirky tidbit watered wine carried layers of meaning. Romans considered it civilized drinking, undiluted wine was barbarian. Medieval chroniclers note men carefully measuring water, claiming too little invited sin and too much invited mutiny. In Napoleonic France, soldiers joked that the ratio of water to wine was an index of morale. More wine meant commanders feared desertion. More water meant commanders feared drunkenness. Civil War troops sometimes soaked hardtack until it swam, claiming it tasted better if you didn't bite but let it drown. Some armies even invented bread puddings of desperation, crumbled, hard, bread boiled with anything sweet, a parody of dessert eaten in the dark with more laughter than sugar. Historians still argue whether this ration ritual was nutritional or psychological. Some insist it was mainly calories. Bread kept stomachs quiet, watered wine prevented dehydration, and offered trace comfort. Others emphasize the ritual ending the day with a shared act created cohesion, the illusion of normal dining. In some accounts, officers encouraged it explicitly, ordering men to eat together at night to suppress whispers and steady nerves. The debate continues, but all sources agree on one fact: men expected the crumb and sip at night, and without it, silence felt hungrier, darker, more dangerous. The sound motif tonight is small and intimate. Bread crust cracks under teeth, wine splashes softly into tin water, sloshes men murmur thanks or jokes. 1,000 miles away from home kitchens, these sounds mimic household rhythms, ghostly echoes of mothers slicing loaves or fathers pouring ale. You chew and hear not mud but memory. The bread tastes faintly of ash, the wine of iron, but your mind insists on calling it supper. Supper is the word that lets sleep in. Someone jokes, "If this is bread, then my boot is cake." Another mutters, "Don't tempt me, I'd eat the boot too." Laughter follows, weary but warm. Soldiers have always salted their crumbs with humour. A crumb shared is a crumb improved. Even in the leanest nights, one man breaking his portion in two became the loudest lullaby. You dip your own bread into watered wine and discover the strange alchemy hardness softens, bitterness sweetens warmth, stirs. You sip after and the thin drink slides down like a promise. Your stomach sighs not from fullness, but from recognition. Ritual matters more than quantity. It tells the body the day is over, the night belongs to you, even if the night still argues. Scholarly notes from siege diaries show that the very act of rationing at night reassured defenders more than walls. To eat even poorly meant supplies remained. To drink even watered meant the cistern had not yet failed. Food was not just sustenance, but proof of endurance. Conversely, silence at mealtime was dire. Men wrote of nights without bread as nights without hope. Archaeologists unearthed carbonized crumbs in collapsed ovens, evidence that men kept baking until the last possible moment. Bread was more than calories, it was continuity. You settle deeper into cloak and straw. The crumb in your belly grows into a stone of calm anchoring you. Around you, the camp's murmurs fade into softer exhalations. Some men hum low tunes between bites, others already snore with crumbs still in hand. You let your eyes close, the taste of bread and wine lingering like a lullaby sung through the mouth. But even here, sleep resists perfection. Your jaw loosens, your breath steadies, and then scratch. The edge of cloak against stubble, no, a sharper scratch. You brush your arm, scratch again, you sigh. Because after bread and wine, after ritual and rest, the next enemy always arrives uninvited, the rats in the granary, the mice in the straw, the scratching companions of every army camp. And you realise the night's peace is not complete until you've shared it with whiskers. The scratching begins as a curiosity, tiny claws ticking against wood or stone, a sound so small it could be your own imagination. But then it multiplies, scampering across rafters, pattering through straw, gnawing with the persistence of teeth that never stop growing. Rats and mice have enlisted in every army without swearing oaths, without carrying arms, and without ever missing a meal. Tonight they are your bedfellows, and the ration you just softened with watered wine may already be on their night's agenda. You curl tighter in your cloak, telling yourself you don't mind until one bold rodent skitters across your boot. Now you mind. Mainstream historical fact, rodents were endemic to camps and sieges. Roman writers complained of rats devouring grain stores and garrisons, prompting strict inspection of granaries. Medieval sources describe vermin swarming castle kitchens during long sieges, spoiling flour sacks before arrows spoiled soldiers. In the 30 Years' War, starving defenders sometimes turned to eating rats themselves, grim necessity documented with reluctant ink. Napoleonic campaigns recorded rats bold enough to chew leather straps while men slept boots, belts, even scabbards. In trench warfare of World War I, rats grew enormous on corpses and refuse becoming as infamous as bullets. The historical constant where soldiers slept, so did rats. Quirky tidbit ingenuity or desperation turned rats from nuisance to resource. Siege of Leiden, 1574, defenders supposedly survived on bread mixed with rat meat, bragging afterward that it tasted of almonds. Soldiers in 18th century India nicknamed large camp rats night chickens and fried them when rations failed. In the Crimea, some men wagered who could catch the fattest rat turning pest control into sport. Others trained camp dogs or even cats drafted into service to patrol barracks, a practice so common that regimental cats sometimes appear in muster rolls. And yes, one French regiment in the 19th century kept a famous cat mascot nicknamed Colonel Minet, who was credited with saving barrels of grain by nightly hunts. Whether myth or truth, it shows how seriously soldiers took their whiskered adversaries. Historians still argue how much damage rodents caused compared to insects and bad sanitation. Some claim fleas and lice spread more disease while rats were more visible, but less medically dangerous until plague outbreaks proved otherwise. Others emphasize that rodent destruction of food supplies had enormous tactical consequences. One spoiled barrel could mean a day's hunger for 100 men. Archaeological digs of medieval and early modern camps consistently turn up gnawed bone and rodent droppings, evidence of close coexistence. Did soldiers sleep poorly because of rats or because of hunger and fear, likely all three tangled together? Tonight's sound motif is not wind or bells, but the staccato of claws and the occasional squeal. It comes from above where rafters provide runways, from below where burrows lace the ground, and from beside you where sacks of flour or straw rustle without wind. You close your eyes and try to breathe slowly, pretending the noises belong to rain on a roof. But rain doesn't pause, sniff and resume. You hear whiskers brushing canvas, a tail flicking against leather teeth, worrying at a forgotten crust. You can smell them too musky acrid, woven into the same air as smoke and sweat. A joke rises because soldiers make jokes even when they're hungry. One voice mutters, "Another army's quartered here." Another answers, "Aye, and they don't pay their rations." Laughter, soft and weary, ripples through the tent. Someone adds, "Promote them. They march faster than we do." The humour doesn't banish the sound, but it shrinks the fear into something chewable. You try practical defences. Pack rations higher, balance them on saddles. Curl feet tighter so boots aren't mistaken for chew toys. Some men sleep with knives in hand, not for battle, but for midnight duels with vermin. Others scatter crumbs away from bedding, luring the creatures into a sacrificial corner. Old veterans claim you should sleep with your head covered completely by cloak, leaving only a breathing gap. That way the rats can't mistake hair for straw. You try it suffocating briefly until you adjust. The tent air grows damp with collective breath, and the scratching continues anyway. Scholarship wanders back in rats in sieges were paradoxical. They spoiled food, but also symbolized abundance. Chroniclers noted that when rats left a city en masse, defenders feared famine animals sensed scarcity before men did. Some records even describe commanders reassuring men by pointing out plenty of vermin, still as if the presence of pests proved survival possible. It's an odd comfort, but a soldier takes what comfort he can. You drift between wake and sleep. In half-dream, the rats become messengers carrying tiny saddlebags of stolen grain to their own armies underground. You almost laugh at the absurdity, then jolt awake at a squeak too close to your ear. A comrade swats the straw beside him and mutters a curse, then lies back down, already too tired to care. Exhaustion wins over disgust. Your breathing steadies, the scratching becomes background noise. You tell yourself it's just another sound in the symphony of camp life, like snores, like bells, like the creak of leather. You let eyelids lower, imagining the rat's feet as tiny drums keeping rhythm with your pulse. Not pleasant, but steady, and steadiness is halfway to sleep. But outside, beyond vermin and tents, a greater percussion begins. Low rumbles, then sharp cracks the sky itself, deciding to play timpani. A storm rolls in first with wind, then with the rolling growl of thunder. Rain patters harder than claws, louder than whispers, washing vermin sounds into silence. You sigh with relief because storms at least don't nibble boots. Yet storms are their own enemies of sleep. Lightning flashes, thunder drums, tents sag under water weight. You curl closer into your damp cocoon, thinking better thunder than teeth. And then you realize tomorrow you'll have to march in sodden cloaks under a sky that doesn't negotiate. Because the next lullaby won't be rats at all. It will be storms over the camp, thunder drumming every dream into fragments. The storm announces itself like a general clearing his throat, a single crack of thunder, far off low and drawn out, promising more. The tent quivers, guy lines tugged by sudden gusts, and the air fills with that metallic tang, the smell of lightning rehearsing in the clouds. Then the rain begins polite at first, a scattered patter on canvas, before committing fully with sheets and drums. Within minutes the camp is an orchestra of water, every surface an instrument. Cloaks slap barrels, boom tents hiss like cymbals. You lie flat eyes open to flashes of light that bleach the fabric overhead, and realize the storm has joined the roster of things determined to keep soldiers from sleep. Mainstream historical fact storms routinely plagued military camps, turning sleep into endurance. Roman legions dreaded tempestues that collapsed leather tents and flooded ditches. Records from Caesar's Gallic campaigns describe entire camps turned into lakes overnight. Medieval armies less mobile often dug drainage trenches around tents or makeshift shelters, but heavy rains still collapsed pavilions and soaked straw bedding. In the 30 Years' War, commanders wrote of lightning setting supply wagons aflame while soldiers spent nights wringing cloaks rather than resting. Napoleonic memoirs groan about the general mud rain transforming fields into sucking bogs, where men lay shivering in pools they called beds. Even in World War I, storms flooded trenches, drowning dugouts and soaking uniforms beyond recognition. Across eras, Thunder became less a spectacle than a nightly adversary. Quirky tidbit lightning and thunder birthed superstitions. Some soldiers believed iron weapons attracted bolts, so they thrust swords and pikes into the earth beside them like lightning rods, effective occasionally. Others muttered charms or scratched crosses into the soil. In medieval chronicles, it's said men placed bread crusts on tent tops to appease the sky, though it likely only fed birds. In Napoleonic camps, soldiers swore that if you fell asleep counting between lightning and thunder, you'd dream of home. Civil War men claimed a tin cup hung at the tent flap warded off strikes. And in more recent wars, thunder sleep became a strange badge of toughness. Soldiers who could nod off mid-storm were considered battle-hardened or simply too exhausted to care if Zeus personally visited. Historians still argue about storms' tactical impact. Did rainstorms sap morale more than enemy fire, or did they paradoxically bring relief, masking noise, cooling heat, forcing pauses in campaigns? Some letters describe soldiers near collapse from wet cold. Others describe the soothing monotony of rain as a rare lullaby, especially if men were already bone-tired. The debate hinges on context. A storm in summer could mean refreshment. In winter, hypothermia. Some argue that rain equalized conditions, enemy and defender both soaked. Others counter that supply chains suffered unevenly, and so one side's misery could outweigh the other's. What remains undisputed storms wrote themselves into every soldier's sleep ledger charged against the body whether or not the spirit objected. Tonight's sound motif is thunder. Each roll begins like a distant drumline grows until it shakes canvas poles, then trails off into muttering grumbles. Between crashes, rain keeps time, a quick staccato that never misses a beat. Wind joins in, tugging at seams, making tent fabric ripple like sails. Inside you press cloak tighter, curling around warmth that feels more imagined than real. The storm is less an interruption than a second commander setting its own schedule. Around you coping strategies emerge. One man sings a lullaby between booms defying the noise. Another pulls his hood so low it covers half his face, convinced cloth equals shield. Veterans mutter jokes. If the enemy attacks, they'll drown first. If I snore loud enough, I'll outdo the thunder. Laughter muffled by rain still travels proof that storms don't entirely own the night. You shift on your bedroll trying to find the one dry patch. Water creeps anyway through seams across oilcloth along every natural slope. Soldiers dig little ditches with bayonets to redirect rivulets, turning tents into tiny civil engineering projects. Some succeed, others wake to soaked boots and floating bread crusts. You wiggle your toes, sigh, and decide that wet feet are better than cold shoulders. Every soldier makes these bargains nightly. Practical science sneaks into the ritual. You count between lightning flash and thunder crash, 5 seconds, 4-3, calculating distance by sound. The storm seems closer now. You tell yourself you're measuring danger. In truth, you're measuring drowsiness. Numbers are a gentle rope to pull your mind down from cliffs of worry. 4 seconds, about a mile. Your eyelids lower. Lightning flashes through your lids, painting red. Thunder barks. You open your eyes again, then smile, because the absurdity of counting miles to sleep is exactly the sort of soldier trick that gets recorded in footnotes centuries later. Scholarly note diaries abound with storm nights described as the worst sleep of campaigns, yet paradoxically also some of the deepest. Exhaustion occasionally toppled men into dreamless slumber, even as rain poured on their faces. Historians puzzle at this duality. How could men sleep in mud baths? The answer is simple and human. When fatigue exceeds discomfort, the body wins. It is not comfort, but collapse that delivers sleep in a storm. You try it now. You breathe with the rain's rhythm, slow and endless. Thunder becomes punctuation, startling but predictable. Your body accepts damp shoulders, damp knees, damp everything. The taste of wet leather lingers in the air, the smell of ozone sharpens. Sleep tiptoes closer, no longer afraid of thunder's shouting. And then a flash so bright it paints the tent walls white. The crash that follows is instant, a cannon dropped directly onto your ears. For a heartbeat, silence as if the storm has ended everything. Then laughter bursts out, someone shouting. That one hit the cook's pot. Another swears it struck near the stables. The camp chatters until the next roll longer, gentler. You realize the storm's worst has passed. Exhaustion seizes the opportunity. Your breathing slows again. Rain softens to patter, thunder to muttering. Sleep, fragile but real, begins weaving its net. You're just slipping into it when you hear the faint roll of hooves in mud. Not thunder now, but cavalry patrols shifting, readying, perhaps even summoned by the storm's cover. The thought brushes you like a cold hand. Sometimes thunder isn't just thunder. Sometimes it hides men moving. Because the next trial of soldiers' sleep is night patrols and midnight alarms, not weather, not vermin, but the sudden jolt of being dragged from half-rest back into duty, steel in hand, before dreams are even gone. Midnight is not an hour, it's a trapdoor. You fall through it thinking you'll sleep, and instead you land on duty. A hand shakes your shoulder, or a whisper cuts through the straw. Alarm! Up! Your eyes snap open, and for a moment you don't know where you are. Mudstone tent barracks, all of them blur into one long corridor of half-sleeps. The sound that woke you isn't thunder this time, or rats, or snoring. It's the unmistakable rhythm of boots moving too fast to be casual. Somewhere a trumpet groans its warning, followed by a drumbeat that isn't drill but demand. You grab your cloak, sling your bag, and stumble out into the black, where the night is suddenly crowded with men who were dreaming seconds ago. Mainstream historical fact night alarms were common, sometimes false, sometimes fatal. In Roman camps, strict vigil shifts ensured that any suspicious movement outside the palisade triggered horns. Medieval fortresses used bells gongs, or simply a shouted chain of warnings, alarm, to rouse sleeping garrisons. In the 16th and 17th centuries, entire camps jolted awake to musket fire that turned out to be panicked over deer or stray dogs. During the American Revolution, diaries describe men leaping from bedrolls 3 times in a single night, each time sure the enemy was upon them. Napoleon's armies drilled reveilled alarm, rehearsing how to turn sleep into lines of battle. Even in the trenches of World War I, the order to stand to at dawn and dusk was ritual, ensuring soldiers never trusted the horizon enough to relax. Quirky tidbit false alarms became running jokes and grudges. A Roman legionary once complained in a letter that his unit's commander sounded alarms for exercise, costing them 3 nights' rest and all goodwill. In medieval siege accounts, defenders sometimes staged fake sorties at night purely to rob besiegers of sleep. Napoleonic veterans joked that owls and foxes were better at exhausting armies than generals, since so many alarms came from animals. In the US Civil War, pranksters occasionally shouted cavalry in the dark, earning bruises, and sometimes charges when their comrades tripped over tent ropes in panic. The punishment for a false alarm was often as harsh as that for sleeping on duty, proving commanders feared fatigue nearly as much as attack. Historians still argue how effective night alarms truly were. Some argue they prevented disaster better to wake 1,000 men for nothing than lose them to a surprise. Others counter that repeated alarms corroded morale, left men perpetually sleep-starved, and dulled reaction times. Did frequent alarms sharpen soldiers or dull them? Accounts differ. One officer praises his men's discipline at 3 a.m. Another confesses his unit staggered like drunkards after too many nights of false scares. The debate circles endlessly, like men marching in the dark, waiting for daylight to settle the question. Tonight's sound motif is alarm. Trumpet notes crack the air off key harsh. Nothing like the orderly reveille of morning. Drums thump, boots slap, mud. Men bark questions louder than answers. Cloaks flap, swords clatter against scabbards, and somewhere a horse neighs in protest at being conscripted into panic. The smell is sweat, stirred awake wool soaked in rain, and torches spitting resin into damp air. You can feel adrenaline shoving sleep aside, hear your own heartbeat trying to outpace the drum. You fall into line with the others, half-dressed, half-awake, wholeheartedly annoyed. Someone mutters, "If it's foxes again, I'll enlist with them." Another replies, "Foxes wouldn't have us, we snore too loud." The laughter is brief, swallowed quickly, but it punctures the fear long enough for shoulders to drop a fraction. Humour at alarms is a form of protest, a refusal to give the night full ownership. Practical drill shows itself. Men grab weapons, but also bedding, because no one trusts the ground not to be stolen in their absence. Packs dangle half-buckled. Helmets perch backward on heads. Lines shuffle toward ramparts, toward gates, toward fields. Officers shout their voices, trying to herd panic into purpose. You stumble forward, your boots filled with river from last night, your eyes filled with lightning ghosts from the storm. The alarm feels endless, yet time is only minutes. Scholarly footnote. Some historians argue that alarms functioned as discipline exercises disguised as danger. Even false alarms conditioned men to respond instantly, turning sleep into muscle memory. Others see them as psychological warfare, particularly in sieges attackers knew defenders couldn't endure too many sleepless nights without cracking. The truth, as always, is messy. For soldiers, alarm was both training and torment, reassurance and robbery. At last the truth arrives. Scouts return. The trumpet stops. Officers mutter with annoyance rather than urgency. The line dissolves into grumbles, the great enemy of armies. False alarm. No attack. The night regains its silence except for the complaints of men denied their dreams. You stumble back toward bedroll, muttering something impolite at foxes, owls, and generals alike, and then the cruelest part, your body flooded with adrenaline, refuses to fall back asleep. You lie on wet straw, staring at canvas lit faintly by stars, ears straining for the next horn. Your hands tremble from exhaustion disguised as alertness. Around you, some men snore instantly, proof that fatigue trumps nerves. You envy them, then sigh. Sleep delayed is sometimes sleep denied, but finally, hours later, your breathing slows again. The night has not ended you yet. You drift briefly shallowly into dreams where alarms turn into music and foxes march in formation. Until dawn arrives, brass in hand, ready to drag you from bedroll again. Because tomorrow brings not only alarms, but the bone-deep fatigue of soldiers who must keep marching in exhaustion, carrying their sleepless nights into miles of endless road. Morning is a thief with muddy boots. It takes the little sleep you've scraped together and drags it out onto the road before you can protest. Your eyelids still taste of midnight alarms, your legs feel borrowed from a man twice your age. Yet the command is the same as always march. So you hoist your pack, tighten straps that already cut, and fall into line with hundreds of others who look just as hollow-eyed. The sound of feet on dirt becomes the new lullaby, except this one won't let you close your eyes. Mainstream historical fact, exhausted marches were as common as battles. Roman legions recorded days of 20-30 kilometers, sometimes more, even after nights of little rest. Medieval armies trudged behind baggage trains, their progress slowed by carts and mud, but no less relentless. Chroniclers note men sleeping while walking, heads bobbing like puppets. Early modern soldiers in the 30 Years' War staggered for weeks, with minimal pauses, their diaries full of complaints about half-rests on roadsides. Napoleonic veterans recalled entire columns shuffling in silence, eyes glazed, bodies upright, only because the men ahead were moving. In the US Civil War, soldiers coined the phrase sleep march, dropping into unconsciousness mid-step, jolted awake when a musket slipped from their shoulder. By the First World War, accounts describe men marching as if hypnotized, their boots moving independently of will. Exhaustion became both tactic and punishment. Quirky tidbit soldiers invented strange coping tricks. Some tied handkerchiefs to the coat of the man ahead, using the tug as both leash and lullaby, letting them close eyes while walking. Others hummed monotonous tunes, one note repeated endlessly to synchronize steps and ward off collapse. Napoleonic soldiers swore by chewing twigs or leather straps to keep jaws working, believing it tricked the brain into thinking it was still alert. In the American Civil War, men joked that they could march in sleep so long as their comrades kept them upright, calling it dream walking. One even claimed to have woken in a new county, swearing he'd slept through the entire march. And yes, occasionally someone truly did collapse into ditches too far gone to wake until jolted or carried. Historians still argue whether sheer exhaustion degraded armies more than hunger or cold. Some argue fatigue was the hidden killer, dulling reflexes, slowing responses and eroding morale. Others point out that armies still managed feats of speed, Caesar's forced marches, Napoleon's lightning campaigns, suggesting soldiers could adapt more than we imagine. Modern historians debate whether sleep marching produced meaningful rest, or only illusions, microdreams that offered no recovery. Some diaries describe waking refreshed after a march they barely remembered. Others confess to feeling more broken than before. The truth, it seems, is that marching in exhaustion was less about restoration than survival, a way of moving bodies forward while minds hovered elsewhere. Tonight's, or rather this morning's sound motif is boots. Hundreds of soles hitting mud, a rhythm heavy as drums. Creak of straps, clink of canteens, coughs echoing down the line. The sound becomes hypnotic. You focus on the beat and let it carry you, because if you resist, you'll fall. The road stretches endlessly grey and indifferent, bordered by fields that blur into sameness. Occasionally a bird calls, cheerful, infuriating. The sky brightens, but your eyes do not. Jokes stumble along with the column. We're marching in our sleep, cheaper than paying for wagons. Another mutters, "Wake me when we arrive. I'll keep walking here." Someone hums a lullaby, absurdly soft, and the men around him join in. Not because it helps, but because it makes exhaustion communal. You smile weakly. Even delirium likes company. Practical soldier science, keep your head down. Eyes half closed, focus on the boots ahead. Don't think about distance, only steps. Breathe with rhythm. Shift pack weight from left to right shoulder every mile to trick your spine into gratitude. Drink sparingly. Too much water makes your belly slosh and your legs resentful. Count in 7s or 9s, numbers awkward enough to keep the brain busy. When all else fails, mutter to yourself. A voice, even your own, anchors you in motion. Scholarly note, exhaustion marches produced hallucinations as often as snores. Diaries from Napoleon's campaigns mention soldiers seeing phantom villages or hearing phantom horns. Civil War accounts describe men conversing with comrades who weren't there, only realizing the absence hours later. Some historians interpret these as early records of sleep deprivation psychosis, proof that the body can keep moving while the mind invents its own company. Others downplay the drama, arguing these were exaggerations for sympathetic readers back home. But the consistency across centuries suggests otherwise, soldiers walking through fogs of a half-dream, caught between battlefields and bedrooms. By midday your feet burn, your knees lock, your back mutinies. Yet the line shuffles on. You don't remember hills or streams, only the unbroken sound of boots. At some point you realize you've been asleep for several steps, the world vanished, then returned, and your legs kept marching without permission. It's terrifying, then comforting. Perhaps you can sleepwalk an entire campaign. Finally the column halts, orders bark camp, men drop where they stand, falling onto mud or straw or stone. You sink down, cloak over your head, pack beneath your neck, boots still on because you don't care anymore. Sleep rises fast, too fast, like a tide eager to swallow you whole. But before you succumb, you notice the silence, the rare, heavy quiet that falls on a camp too tired even to whisper. And in that silence you realize this is the truest soldier's lullaby, not bells, not thunder, not rumors, not even song. Just the absence of sound bought at the cost of miles. You exhale, body collapsing into itself finally, utterly. But silence never holds forever. Out there, somewhere beyond the hills, the enemy drums still beat. And tonight or tomorrow, you may have to fall asleep with their rhythm pounding at the edge of camp, reminding you that rest is always borrowed and never owned. Silence is a treasure, but drums don't respect treasure. They carry through night air like heartbeat echoes of an enemy you haven't yet seen but can already feel. You're stretched on your bedroll body, claiming exhaustion as property, when the first distant boom boom seeps over the ridge. It isn't thunder, it isn't hoofbeats. It's too regular, too deliberate. Enemy drums. They pound like the ticking of a clock that only measures fear. Mainstream historical fact, enemy drums were a staple of war across centuries, both tactical and psychological. Roman armies advanced with cornicines and tubi horns rather than drums, but enemies like the Parthians used kettle drums to shake the air. Medieval chronicles mention Turkish and Mongol forces deploying massive nakara, and kettle drums, their echo rolling across valleys at night, meant to convince defenders that an army of giants approached. By the 16th century, European regiments had codified drum signals for marching, waking, and alarms, so when the enemy's rhythm pulsed across no man's land, it was as familiar as it was terrifying. In the American Civil War, drums mostly kept time for parades, yet soldiers swore they could hear Confederate or Union bands striking up across lines at night. And in World War I, though drums gave way to artillery, veterans described enemy bombardment as iron drums beating all night. Whether hide or gunmetal, the effect was the same, sleep stolen by sound. Quirky tidbit, some armies weaponized music itself. At the Siege of Constantinople, 1453, Ottoman musicians pounded drums and blasted horns throughout the night, creating relentless sonic warfare that frayed defenders' nerves. In the 18th century, anecdotal reports describe Native American war parties drumming on shields and tree trunks near enemy camps, less to coordinate than to unsettle. Napoleonic foes sometimes played patriotic tunes within earshot, daring the enemy to despair. And then there's the stranger humour in one Civil War skirmish. A drummer boy supposedly fell asleep mid-beat, the rhythm staggering until the officer shook him awake, proof that even war's soundtrack had human limits. Historians still argue whether night drumming genuinely shattered morale, or simply annoyed exhausted soldiers. Some scholars insist it amplified fear, preventing deep rest, and leaving troops jittery before battle. Others suggest it was largely bluster-loud yes, but quickly tuned out by men already hardened to noise. A few argue its main function was signalling within armies not psychological attack at all, and that defenders retroactively exaggerated the terror of it. Still, too many letters and diaries describe sleepless nights under the enemy's beating hide for it to be dismissed as harmless. Tonight's sound motif is rhythm. Steady, deliberate, not thunder, but close enough to trigger memory. Boom, boom, a pause. Boom, boom, boom. The cadence shifts, mocking your heartbeat until you don't know which drum belongs to you and which to them. Between beats, silence stretches too far, making the next strike inevitable and cruel. You lie still, counting, failing, giving up. Men beside you mutter curse or simply roll over cloaks pulled higher, as though cloth could block sound. One sighs. They mean to drum us mad, and no one contradicts him. You try the usual tricks, cloak over ears, humming low to drown rhythm, counting backwards. None work. The drum insists. It worms into marrow. Soon your thoughts march to its beat, boots, boots, boots. You imagine the enemy circling fires, drummer boys half asleep, officers smiling as defenders toss and turn. You resent the faceless musicians as though they personally stole your blanket. A joke appears half-hearted but useful. Someone whispers, "If they don't attack tomorrow, I'll march over and hire them for parades." Another adds, "They've only got one song." Laughter flickers small but real. Humour makes the drum less alien, more human, a noise created by hands not gods. Practical wisdom surfaces too. Veterans advise don't fight the rhythm. Borrow it. Breathe with it. Sleep on its beat. You try. Inhale on boom, exhale on silence. At first your lungs rebel, but slowly the trick works. The drum becomes a pendulum, not an enemy. Its predictability helps where silence betrayed you. The body desperate agrees this is the rhythm of a heart only larger. You drift not happily, but inevitably rocked by your foe. Scholarly note diaries reveal this strange adaptation often. Soldiers reported eventually sleeping on the enemy's drums, a grudging surrender that turned torment into lullaby. Historians puzzle, was it resignation or resilience? Likely both. Armies cannot stop sound. They can only reframe it. Your eyelids close. Dreams nudge in. You see drums morph into giants' footsteps, then into waves hitting a shore, then into nothing at all. The night carries you further than you thought possible, until dawn pries its way over the horizon. The drums stop. Trumpets within your own camp blare. Orders shout. Sleep ends with the cruelest irony. You finally drifted off just as the night ended. You stand groggy, strapping gear, realizing the cycle never pauses, and here, after long nights and endless beats, comes the final surrender. Not to alarm, not to storm, not to whisper or rat or drum, but to the body itself collapsing into sleep wherever it can, on stones in mud, in arms in dreams stolen between heartbeats. Because that's the last chapter of soldiers' sleep, not comfort but collapse. And now, at the end of all these long marches and longer nights, the drums fade, the storms pass, and the alarms finally hush. You are still here. You have carried the weight of mud, of whispers, of sleepless watches, and of every crude pillow a soldier ever tried to rest upon. You have crossed rivers in cold boots, listened to fleas organize their own battles, and even let the enemy's drums set the tempo of your breathing. Through it all, you found ways to drift, sometimes laughing, sometimes muttering prayers, sometimes surrendering simply because exhaustion insisted. So in this last stretch, let's slow everything down. The tent stops shaking. The rain gentles into a mist so fine it feels like the sky is exhaling. The rats and fleas retreat into the silence of stories already told. Even the sergeant's legendary snore softens, no longer a sawmill, but a low hum fading into the background like a lullaby. Picture your bedroll not on stone or mud, but on a soft hilltop, the grass cool beneath you, the night air warm enough to cradle. Around you there is no alarm, no whisper, no duty. Only a hush that spreads from one side of the horizon to the other. The only sound is your own breath, steady and slow, joining the rhythm of countless soldiers before you, who finally found peace not in victory or defeat, but in the simple act of closing their eyes. Let that rhythm carry you now. Inhale as if you are gathering the quiet. Exhale as if you are giving the night permission to keep it. Each breath slower, longer, softer, until the world itself seems to pause. Nothing left to hold, nothing left to guard, only rest.